secrets of the art world.
Fake or Fortune starts Sunday at 8 on BBC One.
This is BBC One with a change to our schedule as David Cameron leaves office and Theresa May arrives, the UK's new Prime Minister, in a BBC News special.
Welcome to Westminster on the day Britain gets a new Prime Minister. The formal handover in Downing Street will take place shortly. David Cameron will resign and Theresa May will step into number 10. Right now, David Cameron is inside number 10, spending the last few hours as Prime Minister with his family. Very soon, he'll be leaving for Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation, making way for Theresa May as Britain's new Prime Minister. Stay with us for full coverage of the day's historic events. Very good afternoon from Downing Street, where very shortly David Cameron's 6 years and 62 days as Prime Minister will come to a formal close as he makes his way to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation and to make way for Theresa May, who will arrive here a little later to take office as First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Today's events are the result of the most turbulent period in British politics in living memory. A defeat for Mr Cameron in that EU referendum and a curtailed Conservative leadership race which ended earlier this week when Mrs May was left as the only candidate. So this afternoon we'll be following the events as Mr Cameron and Mrs May both visit the Queen at Buckingham Palace. We'll be listening very carefully to what they both have to say to the British people on this momentous day, because for the first time since 1979 a female Prime Minister will take up residence at number 10, facing immense challenges following that referendum result and by all accounts preparing to unveil a radically different ministerial team. That is all to come, but it's already been quite an eventful day. Just after 10 o'clock, Mr Cameron left 10 Downing Street for his final session of Prime Minister's Questions to receive tributes from his colleagues and to make his own final remarks in the House at the dispatch box.
Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
And after that standing ovation on the Conservative side, a little later Mr Cameron returned with his wife Samantha and their 3 children to Downing Street, where they've spent the past few hours with colleagues and thanking staff for their support over the past 6 years. The incoming Prime Minister, Theresa May, has spent the day at Westminster preparing to make her own visit to Buckingham Palace, where she'll be asked by the Queen to form the next government. And in fact, the Queen spent the morning in Cambridge, visiting the air ambulance station with the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince William. Her Majesty is now back at Buckingham Palace. The expectation is that Mr Cameron will come to the palace at around 5 o'clock and Theresa May will follow, becoming the 13th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign.
Just a short drive from Downing Street. I'm here at Buckingham Palace, where we'll be observing the departure of an outgoing Prime Minister and the arrival of the new one.
So in the next couple of hours, we will witness the departure of one Prime Minister who won a majority just over a year ago, let's not forget that, and the arrival of a new Prime Minister whose task is to provide stability and confidence at such a turbulent time in British politics. Theresa May was sitting right next to Mr Cameron as he attended his final session of Prime Minister's Questions today, and he paid this tribute to his successor.
Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
The Speaker and lots of Conservative MPs there, a few Labour MPs too, by the way, and some Ulster Unionists as well, giving a standing ovation to Mr Cameron. Remarkable scenes in the House of Commons earlier. The Leader of the House of Commons, someone who's played a very prominent part in Mrs May's campaign, is Chris Grayling. He's expected to have a very prominent role in this new government. He joins us now from College Green, just outside the Houses of Parliament. Mr Grayling, thanks very much for joining us today. Just underline the significance of what is happening today for us.
Well, this is a momentous day for our country. Obviously, any change of Prime Minister, any change of government is a very significant moment. It's also a farewell to David Cameron, and I should start by saying that I think the tributes paid in the House of Commons today, the applause, were well merited. I've worked for him for 11 years. It's going to be very strange not having him there as leader of the Conservative Party. I think he's done a great job for this country. But of course, we now move on. We've got an excellent new Prime Minister, or will have shortly, in Theresa May. She will be a strong, effective leader for this country in meeting the challenges that lie ahead.
You, as I say, have played a prominent part in the campaign. You've chaired that campaign for her and you're a close colleague of hers. Tell us a little bit about the way that she's been preparing over the last few days for what's going to happen today.
Well, she's a very meticulous person. The thing about Theresa, when you give her a job, she does it properly, she does it thoroughly. And so since Monday, when we first discovered that Andrea Leadsom was pulling out, she's been working very hard with the team around her to make sure she's as prepared as possible to take over later today. And she will hit the ground running. She'll be straight into the job. There are big challenges facing the Prime Minister every day of every week, and she will very much pick up the mantle, get on with the job and be very effective at it.
Give us a sense, Chris, of the balance here between looking forward to the challenge and being rather daunted by the scale of the challenge.
Well, I think anyone who becomes Prime Minister, any members of any new government, look ahead. Well, not daunted is perhaps not the right word, but with anticipation of big challenges ahead. We're really going to focus on three things. The first, clearly, is to move ahead with our plans to leave the European Union. That's a very firm commitment. The British people have given us a mandate, a clear mandate to leave the European Union, and we'll do all the work needed to make sure that becomes a reality and do it in the right way for Britain. But we've also got to make sure we carry on making good economic progress, and we need, as Theresa's been rightly saying in the last few days, we continue the work of a one-nation Conservative government elected a year ago, and she'll bring a fresh dimension to our desire to make sure we are a country, an economy where people aren't left behind, where we don't leave individuals or communities on the sidelines, where we're an inclusive nation focused on compassionate conservatism.
On that final point, and there'll be a lot of focus on the message you've just given there, how soon will it be apparent that Mrs May perhaps has a different set of policies to build on the principles that you've just outlined there?
Well, I think you'll see both. We've already got a manifesto that we were elected on 15 months ago that we're in the middle of implementing. That work will clearly carry on. But what Theresa will do is bring a fresh dimension to it, fresh ideas, a fresh approach, an extra focus on that One Nation agenda. She's got her own ideas about how to strengthen it. You'll see those in the weeks ahead. But it's also about carrying on implementing the programme we were elected on 15 months ago, which people expect us to deliver during this Parliament.
Can I ask you for a sense of timing? I know this is sensitive, but when do you think, will we, for example, by tomorrow, have a good sense of the main holders of cabinet positions?
Well, I think she'll clearly want to move as quickly as possible, as quickly as sensibly possible, to make sure the new government's in place. As regards exact timings, that's going to be very much for her, but within the next day or two we should have, I think, the full shape of the government. We've got a job of work to do. We don't want to sit around. We've got to get on with the job. We've got challenges ahead. We've got to rise to those quickly. And one of the good things about Andrea Leadsom's decision, and I pay tribute to her for being big enough to put the country ahead of her own interests, is it does mean we can now get on with the job of dealing with those challenges rather than going through 2 months of uncertainty.
Supervising the Brexit process is clearly going to be one of the main priorities, and it's going to be something that's going to exercise lots of minds here in Downing Street and elsewhere in Whitehall. Is taking charge of that process a task that you would like to take on?
Well, look, I've been very clear in saying when I agreed to take on chairing Theresa's campaign, I said to her very clearly, I don't want her to offer me a job. I don't want her to offer anybody a job. I don't want her to do any deals. I want her to take the right decisions about who is the best person for each job she has at her disposal. So she's promised me nothing. I've asked for nothing. I'll do what, if anything, I'm asked to do. And I think that's the way all of us should approach the next few hours.
We've heard a lot, Chris, about the fact that Mrs May isn't the kind of politician who does quiet backroom deals. You seem to be suggesting that certainly in your case and others, there have been no deals done before she gets here to number 10.
There have been no deals done. It's right and proper that there should be no deals done. What you want is a Prime Minister who's able to pick the right people for the job, not somebody who's promised people a post in government in exchange for their vote in a leadership contest. I think that's really important. Theresa hasn't done that. She's not done backroom deals. She's not agreed things in advance. She is now preparing to announce her government, but she'll have done it on the basis of who the best people are to do the job, who are the right people for the tasks ahead.
You keep on emphasising the one nation Conservative philosophy.
Yep.
To what extent do you expect Mrs May to underline that when she says a few words before she enters number 10 later?
I'm sure she'll talk extensively about that. It's one of the things that drives her in politics. We've got a really good foundation to build on. We've seen a huge fall in unemployment. We've seen a big drop in the number of children growing up in workless households. We've made a real difference in the last 6 years under David Cameron, but there's a lot more to do, and she'll be talking about that later and in the coming days.
Mr Grayling, we may see you in Downing Street later on, who knows, but thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
You're very welcome.
Chris Grayling there, who's been Leader of the House of Commons. I think it's a fair bet that he's not going to be in that job for much longer, but who knows what kind of prominent role he'll be fulfilling in Mrs May's new government. We'll find out maybe a little later today. So this afternoon's transfer of power, the transfer of office, if you like, follows a time-honoured formula. Mr Cameron and Mrs May must each in turn visit the palace for that audience with Her Majesty the Queen. Earlier today, as I mentioned just now, the Queen travelled from Cambridgeshire. She'd been at Sandringham earlier, arriving just around lunchtime. My colleague Sophie Rayworth is at the palace to talk a little more about the afternoon's event. Sophie?
Yes, good afternoon from Buckingham Palace. It's here that in less than 2 hours' time, at around 5 o'clock, we think, that is when all the attention will be focused here, because David Cameron's last ever audience with the Queen as Prime Minister will take place just around 5 o'clock. He'll then be followed by Theresa May, who will be only the second woman Prime Minister of the Queen's reign. Well, I'm joined here at the Palace by our Royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell, and just talk us through what will actually happen when David Cameron arrives here.
Sophie, hugely important constitutional events, hugely important events for our country, which will be conducted in quite a matter-of-fact but business-like way. As we've been reporting, David Cameron will arrive at the palace at 5 o'clock or thereabouts. It's thought that he will certainly bring Mrs Cameron, possibly even their children with them. We don't know, but it's a possibility. But initially, of course, Mr Cameron will have a private meeting, one-on-one, just as is always the case for the Prime Minister's audiences with the Queen every Wednesday evening at around 6:30. And it will be in the Queen's private audience room, just the two of them, no officials, that Mr Cameron will tender his resignation, 6 years and 2 months after his appointment. There are no seals of office for the British Prime Minister, nothing to hand over. After the formal business is done, one would imagine that the Queen will then invite Mrs Cameron in. If there are children there, well, who knows? And they will, I'm sure, have a little discussion about what's going to happen to them now. But I don't expect that audience with Mr Cameron will last very long, perhaps 15, perhaps 20 minutes. They will all be aware of the need to get on, to fill the void. At that moment, there is no Prime Minister.
So, because it will be a very quick turnaround, won't it? We're expecting Theresa May here within 10 minutes after David Cameron
It's
leaves.
all very precisely choreographed. Whether Mr Cameron changes cars and all that sort of thing, we'll have to look out for that. But very quickly, as you say, Theresa May with her husband Philip will arrive at the palace. She will go in, just her, with the Queen, and the Queen will ask her, are you in a position to form a government? Because we must remember that the criteria for the appointment of a Prime Minister is that it is someone who can command the confidence of the House of Commons. So normally it would be the leader of the largest party in the Commons. She is the leader of the Conservative Party now. She will be asked if she can form a government. She will say yes, whereupon the Queen, the only person, the monarch is the only person who can appoint the Prime Minister. She will then invite Mrs May to form a government, and from that moment on, she is Prime Minister. Nothing else happens. They shake hands. There's no kissing of hands, although it's called the kissing of hands. The only kissing of hands, or the light brushing with the lips, happens at the Privy Council when ministers are appointed. So with a handshake, that will be it. She will then be Prime Minister, and one imagines that then that Philip May will be invited in.
And we know that Theresa May has met the Queen a number of times, at the Privy Council being one, but we don't know the nature of their relationship, and that is a relationship they really are going to have to
Which is absolutely of considerable importance. And one must remember that the Queen, although she is 90, is still a fully engaged head of state. She's very much the sort of the executive woman who is still very interested, and particularly, of course, at the moment, given the scale of the challenges that the nation is facing, she will be particularly interested in to hear what Prime Minister May by then will be saying at this first audience with her as Prime Minister. They haven't got long to get to know each other at this important time because, of course, the Queen will be off to Balmoral in just a couple of weeks. The Prime Minister is always invited up to Balmoral in September. It will be the Mays who will be going up there. But that relationship is important. And the Queen, I don't think, will know Mrs. May not terribly well. As Home Secretary, you don't get to meet the Queen that often, but certainly there have been lunches after Privy Councils. There was one in April and I think one in May at Windsor Castle. So there has been some opportunity, and the Queen will know that Theresa May is someone who has long been tipped as a possible Prime Minister, and the Queen is the sort of executive person who will just take an interest, quietly, what's she like? But it will be very important for them now to create a relationship between these two, female head of state, female head of government.
OK, Dick, for now, thank you very much. And back to you, Hugh, in Downing Street.
Sophie, thank you very much. If you're just joining us here on BBC One and on the BBC News Channel, this is our special coverage of a rather important day in British politics. We have a new Prime Minister, Theresa May, arriving here in Downing Street a little later. Before that, we're expecting to see David Cameron emerging from number 10, maybe saying a few words here in Downing Street before he leaves for the palace to tender his resignation to Her Majesty the Queen. And then we expect to see Theresa May making that journey to the palace and then returning here to enter number 10 as the first female Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher arrived in this very street in 1979. Someone who knows Mrs. May well and has worked closely with her in the past, Andrew Griffiths, the Conservative MP, a former Chief of Staff to Mrs. May some years ago. Andrew, thanks very much for joining us. What does today mean for you?
Oh, it's very, very exciting. I think we're all excited to see what a Theresa May government is going to look like. This is a momentous decision, the second female Prime Minister the country has ever had. And I think we're all looking forward to what the future holds.
When we talk about qualities and the qualities needed for this immense task ahead, what would you single out for viewers who are just wondering what Mrs. May is made of?
She's incredibly hard-working. She's a very determined woman. She was always one of those people who was first in the office and would stay late until all the work was done. She's one of those people who does the detail. And of course, at these challenging times when we have negotiations with Europe, she is exactly the kind of woman to do that important job for us. She's also, I think, incredibly steely. She's tough. She has made it through a very male-dominated Westminster, and she's got to the highest level in politics. And she's done that because she is an incredibly steely and tough lady. And I think going into these negotiations, having somebody with Theresa May's mettle is really, really important for us.
You used the word steely and tough, Andrew, and I'm just wondering, would you go as far as Ken Clarke and say that she's difficult? He actually said something stronger than that, didn't he? But he said she was a difficult woman.
She is difficult. She can be very stubborn. If she cares passionately about something, she is prepared to fight for it and fight hard. She has, I think, ripped up the Westminster rule book by not playing the normal games that we see all too often in Westminster. Theresa May was never one of those people who took part in the old boys network. You would never see Theresa hacking around in the smoking room or joining the right dining clubs in order to get on. She just stuck to the job in hand. She's incredibly diligent and hard-working, and she has proved that in order to climb the greasy pole, you don't need to do those things. She has succeeded in a man's world, and I think we'll see in the way she governs and the way she runs her governments that she wants other people to be able to do that too.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you underline the theme about succeeding in a man's world, and I'm wondering what the makeup of this new cabinet and ministerial team will look like. Do you think that will reflect the fact that she's very much focused on maybe a more balanced look?
I'm sure it will. One of the things that Theresa has always been incredibly passionate about is equality and getting more women into Parliament. She established an organisation called Women to Win to help more women get into Parliament. She's spoken before about her desire to have a 50-50 parliament, have half men, half women. So I'm absolutely sure that she will be looking to bring the talented women into in the Conservative Party that are currently on the backbenches or in lower ministerial positions into the cabinet. I've seen not only that Theresa has made speeches about the importance of women in politics, I've actually seen her travel around the country, up and down the breadth of our nation, making speeches encouraging women to get involved in politics, to stand themselves. And I've also seen, on top of her ministerial work, on top of the work that she does in Westminster, the hours that she has dedicated to helping women, to mentoring them, to encouraging them to succeed in politics. You know, it is a difficult life, it is a difficult role for many women to take on, and Theresa has not just been an inspiration for women to get involved in politics, she's also been a huge help and a friend to many of the women that we see on the backbenches today.
A final thought, Andrew, very briefly, if I may. Will she be relying on a very small group of people around her, or do you think that she'll have to depend on a wider circle of people now?
Well, Theresa has never had cliques. She's never had that sort of those networks around her. She's always been a very, very independently minded woman. But she will also, obviously, reach out to the party. One of the main attractions, I think, as well as her experience, was the fact that she could be a unifying force. We've had a very bloody and sometimes ill-tempered referendum campaign, and it's hugely important for the Conservative Party that we come together now. I think Theresa has got the experience and the understanding, the adeptness to do that.
Andrew Griffiths, thank you so much for joining us today. And a welcome to our audience on BBC World who are joining us now. Joining our audiences on BBC One and on the BBC News channel for this special coverage of the transfer of power from one Prime Minister to another. Here in Downing Street, in the heart of London, we'll have Theresa May, who's been Home Secretary for the last 6 years, arriving here a little later on to step into number 10 Downing Street as Britain's new Prime Minister, replacing David Cameron, who of course will be tendering his resignation to the Queen very shortly. He'll be leaving number 10. He's inside at the moment with his family, probably thanking all the staff who've been helping him and supporting him over the last 6 years or so. He'll be leaving quite soon and tendering his resignation to the Queen, allowing Mrs May to come here and put her own stamp on government and, let's face it, to try to tackle some of the immense challenges that now face this new government of hers. Mr Cameron took his last Prime Minister's Questions time in the House of Commons today. He congratulated Mrs May on a new job. He told Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, that he was looking rather splendid. There was a joke there about how people were dressed today. And of course there was a big underlining of Mr Cameron's main theme, which is that he felt that there were things that he'd achieved in Downing Street which were sources of pride. So we can talk a little more about that as we go along today. But first of all, let's have this report from our correspondent Eleanor Garnier on events in Parliament.
The youngest Prime Minister to leave office for more than 100 years. His time in number 10 cut short.
What next, Prime Minister? Are you looking forward to a rest?
After 6 years and 62 days, it is all over. Far swifter than he'd planned or expected. One last journey to the Commons for David Cameron's final Prime Minister's Questions.
Prime Minister.
His successor at his side and his wife and children in the public gallery.
Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Other than one meeting this afternoon with Her Majesty the Queen, the diary for the rest of my day is remarkably light.
And if he's looking to fill it, there were suggestions aplenty.
I'm told that there are lots of leadership roles out there at the moment. There's the England football team. There's Top Gear. There's even across the big pond a role that needs filling.
Jeremy Corbyn.
And rather than clashing with the Prime Minister, the Labour leader paid his compliments.
Mr Speaker, it's only right that after 6 years as Prime Minister we thank the Right Honourable Member for Witney for his service. I've often disagreed with him, but there are some of his achievements I really want to welcome and pay recognition to today. One is helping to secure the release of Shakar Amir from Guantanamo Bay and legislating to achieve equal marriage within our society.
A moment too for Mr Cameron to attempt to shape his own legacy.
We've cut the deficit by 2/3. There are 2.5 million more people in work in our country. There's almost 1 million more businesses. 2.9 million apprenticeships have been trained under this government.
And he couldn't resist a last dig at the Labour leader.
I have to say I'm beginning to admire his tenacity. He is reminding me of the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail. He's been kicked so many times, but he says, keep going, it's only a flesh wound. I admire that.
But in the end, Jeremy Corbyn wished him well. It was almost as if the two leaders had made up.
First of all, thank you for the kind remarks and the good wishes to my amazing wife Samantha and my lovely children who are all watching from the gallery today.
And there was one final thing he had to set straight about the Downing Street cat.
And the rumour that somehow I don't love Larry. I do. And I have photographic evidence to prove it. Sadly, I can't take Larry with me. He belongs to the house and the staff love him very much, as do I.
And from his backbenchers, there was admiration.
Can I first of all join all those in thanking the Prime Minister for the statesmanlike leadership that he's given to our party and to the country for the last 6 years, and to thank him particularly on this occasion for the debating eloquence, but also the wit and the humour that he's always brought to Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday.
Angus Robertson!
But it wasn't all warm words for Mr Cameron.
The Prime Minister's legacy will undoubtedly be that he has taken us to the brink of being taken out of the European Union, so we will not be applauding his premiership on these benches.
And so it was, onto his feet for a final time as Prime Minister.
The last thing I'd say is that you can achieve a lot of things in politics. You can get a lot of things done. And that, in the end, the public service, the national interest, that is what it's all about. Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
For now, though, fond farewells. One last wave, a final goodbye, as power passes from one Prime Minister to the next. Ellen Agagna, BBC News, Westminster.
Yes, some laughter in Prime Minister's questions and, of course, lots of applause. And at some points it was almost easy to forget why today is taking place. And it's taking place, of course, because David Cameron called that referendum and failed to secure that Remain vote in the EU referendum itself. And that is why he's having to leave Downing Street as Prime Minister and resign today, just over a year after he won that majority in the general election last year. So let's look maybe beyond the applause and the laughter today, because those are the circumstances which define today's events. And there was some pointed questions, not least from the Scottish Nationalists and others too representing Northern Ireland, asking about the implications of that vote, that EU referendum vote, on different parts of the UK. So what we're going to do now is talk to Howell Griffith, who's in Cardiff for us. Chris Buckler is in Belfast. First, we're going to go to Edinburgh and we're going to talk to our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, for a sense of the response there today. Sarah?
Well, already here in Edinburgh, the SNP have been very critical of Theresa May's record in government so far. They want to highlight the fact that just because there is a change of Prime Minister, that does not change their opposition to Tory policies in Westminster. And Nicola Sturgeon's been very critical of Theresa May herself when she said that she couldn't guarantee the rights of EU nationals living in the UK. Sturgeon attacked her for that. Going forward, the Scottish Government are going to insist that Theresa May gives them a place at the table during the Brexit negotiations. They insist they want to sit at the top table and be a full part of those discussions. And don't forget, Nicola Sturgeon has said she thinks it is highly likely that there will be a second referendum on Scottish independence. We know Theresa May has said she passionately believes Scotland should stay in the United Kingdom. And she met the Scottish Tory leader, Ruth Davidson, yesterday in Downing Street. And Ruth Davidson told her she had to make sure Scotland was at the front of her agenda, not treated as some kind of afterthought, because it may not be long before Theresa May finds herself fighting a campaign to try and keep Scotland inside the United Kingdom. Now for The View from Cardiff, here's my colleague Hull Griffiths.
Sarah, Theresa May hasn't been a regular visitor here to the National Assembly in Cardiff. Arguably, she had no reason to get too deeply involved in devolution until today, but Prime Minister May's inbox is very, very full, and there are some pertinent Welsh questions in there. Towards the top, the ongoing steel crisis that affects thousands of people here in South Wales. It's been rumbling on in the background now for months. Just last week we heard from Tata Steel they're putting a pause on their sales process. That has left many people uncertain as to what this summer will bring. Could they be out of a job? Will they be under new ownership? Answers from Number 10 need to come on what happens to the steel pension pot. Could anything more be done to entice new buyers or make sure Tata keep their workforce here? Other questions, well, Brexit, of course. Wales, different to Scotland, different to Northern Ireland, voted as a majority for Brexit, but Wales has also been a net beneficiary of EU funding. Promises made by the Leave campaign before that vote that any shortfall would be made up by a redistribution of funds. She's the Prime Minister that either has to live up to that pledge or deliver some bad, difficult news. And then, of course, the future of this place. There is a Wales bill now working its way through Parliament that brings more power. But will Prime Minister May say that's the end of it? No more devolution for Wales? Or would she be the person to contemplate giving even more power to the devolved governments? That's The View in Cardiff Bay. Now time to go over to Belfast and my colleague Chris Buckler.
Well, Hyle, here in Northern Ireland, unionists have given a relatively warm welcome to Theresa May becoming Prime Minister. And that probably reflects that they see her as a traditional Tory, someone who shares a lot of their values. It also probably explains why nationalists have been a little cooler in their response. In fact, Sinn Féin have gone so far as to suggest that Theresa May could be bad for Northern Ireland and bad for the peace process. And there are still outstanding issues, despite those years of progress at Stormont. And one of them is, of course, Brexit. There are many people who feel that Northern Ireland's economy is particularly exposed to it, not least because of that cross-border relationship and trade with the Republic of Ireland and that question of the border itself. Now, as the then Home Secretary, Theresa May came to Northern Ireland during that referendum campaign. She said herself, to put in her own words, it was inconceivable that there wouldn't be changes to the border, that it would remain completely open, that it was inconceivable that there wouldn't be some type of controls that would be put there. I think as Prime Minister, she might well have a different view, because Theresa May knows that at Stormont relationships can be fragile, they can be tense, and she doesn't want to unsettle any of those Anglo-Irish relationships.
Chris, thanks very much there in Belfast. Chris Buckler and Howell Griffith in Cardiff, and our Scotland editor Sarah Smith in Edinburgh there for us, and a sense there of the different priorities in different parts of the United Kingdom, which are raised, I suppose, by this transfer of power today, not least in the context of the European referendum that took place just a few weeks ago. It seems like an age ago, but it was just a few weeks ago, and it's been a very, very turbulent time. If you're just joining us here on BBC One or the BBC News Channel, or indeed on BBC World, we are broadcasting our special coverage from Downing Street on the day that David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the past 6 years, is tendering his resignation to the Queen in a short while, and he'll be replaced here a little later by Theresa May, who has been Home Secretary for the past 6 years. That's the course of events. On timings, well, it's never easy to call these things, but if we're expecting Mr Cameron to be at Buckingham Palace at around 5 o'clock, well, then we can expect maybe a departure from here and maybe a statement from Mr Cameron a short while before then. So that gives you a sense of the kind of timings, but let's just wait and see, shall we? And Vicky Young is with me, our chief political correspondent, who knows these things inside out. Vicky, just a sense of the way this has been organised today. We'll come to bigger questions about legacy in a moment, but just to underline for viewers, this timetable today is really nailed down very precisely.
Yeah, but they had to do it quite quickly. You know, everyone thought this was going to happen in September. They would have had all summer to think about it. Theresa May thought she'd have an 8-week campaign, which she may or may not win, to think about her government, what she was going to do. And David Cameron, on the other hand, thinking he had a couple of months to think about his legacy, to have a farewell conference, international conference maybe in September. Suddenly, all of that changed. very, very dramatically on Monday, and they then had very quickly to put all these things in place. And like you say, a lot of it is logistics. It's about removing the Camerons from here, the family. They have a young family, and obviously, as you say, the protocols, going to see the Queen, David Cameron formally saying, I am now no longer going to be the Prime Minister, and then Theresa May saying she can command the authority of the House. And then she will come into here. One of the first things she has to do is get a briefing from the Cabinet Secretary. This really is where the civil service takes over for a while. They have done this many times before. They know what they're doing. She will get a security briefing. Of course, she's across all of that already. She's been Home Secretary for 6 years or so. She knows all about that kind of thing. So, she is walking into here not as someone who's is alien to her. She's got a lot more experience than some.
When she arrives, the Cabinet Secretary and all the civil service, senior civil service, as you say, will be there, and they will have a plan. And of course, there have been talks in the past few days. Question is, Vicky, to what extent she'll be able to set out some very clear priorities for the government straight away for the civil service to implement. Do you think that work's been done over the past couple of days? Although, as you say, the timetable's been very curtailed.
There has been talk, and the civil service will have come up with some ideas for her. Now, she may or may not accept them, but there's already been rumours about looking at certain departments, smaller things like you move universities, bring that out of BIS and put it back into the Department of Education, that kind of thing. Things that she can look at straight away. But it's interesting, people have written about what happens to new prime ministers when they go through there. They're sat down, the first thing they are reminded of is they are in charge of the country's nuclear weapons. And there were reports that Tony Blair, when this was made clear to him, went rather pale when the enormity of what is happening, that you are becoming the Prime Minister of this country. Yeah. That is a moment, I think, if you sit in that cabinet room, and that would really dawn on you. But Theresa May will have ideas about the people she wants to bring in around her. There's a lot of talk about who she will bring in those big jobs, the people who are going to be by her side, she hopes, for the next 4 years or so as she embarks on this journey, which we know is going to be so dominated by Brexit and those negotiations. There are similar parallels with David Cameron. He had lots of ideas when he came in, the things he wanted to do, but actually they had no money. There'd been a banking crash. His 5 years in coalition with the Liberal Democrats was so dominated, wasn't it, by the economy. I think in some ways he felt he was just getting going a year after winning that general election.
And that's the question, Vicky, isn't it? When he comes out and, we're expecting him to make a statement, what do you think he'll be wanting to say in terms of trying to define some kind of legacy? Because everyone, clearly, understandably, is going to be talking about the aftermath of the referendum and the reason today is taking place. He will clearly be wanting to talk about other things over the past 6 years.
Yeah, he's not going to be able to escape that. There is no doubt about it. He has gone not at the time of his choosing because of that referendum. The UK is leaving the EU and he didn't want that to happen. It was his decision. But he will look back on becoming opposition leader, for example. He came in with a very modernising message. He did change the Conservative Party. And again, that's a thread, I think, that runs from him to Theresa May, that they are seen as people who have a modern outlook. They have changed the party. She will continue some of that, but he will look certainly at the economy. This is, I think, David Cameron coming out after
That was the departure early after Prime Minister's question. So this was inside the Houses of Parliament, emerging from one of the many courtyards there, and this is the Prime Minister's cavalcade earlier, leaving the Commons for the last time as Prime Minister in what must have been quite an emotional and quite a poignant moment for him and the family, because Samantha Cameron and the 3 children were all in the public gallery watching for them. So as a family, it must have been a moment of, well, pride probably in the fact that he's been Prime Minister for the last 6 years.
The children were enjoying it. At one point the little girl was cheering him in the public gallery with her little cuddly toy.
But laced with sadness as well in terms of the circumstances of the departure.
Yeah, and also the Downing Street staff. This is something we don't often talk about, but a whole team moves out. They've been with the Prime Minister. This is the end of an era for them. It really does feel like the end of an era, and because it's come about so suddenly, it will be harder for them to think about. And I think there will be, of course, disappointment that there are so many things that he would have wanted to do and he just hasn't been able to do it. Of course, people will say he brought it on himself. He held that referendum. He will say it's because of democracy, it was the right thing to do, but in the end it has cost him his job.
Yeah. More to talk about later, Vicky, because very soon, just to explain to viewers, we expect that possibly the microphones and the podium to be set up in the street for Mr Cameron's departure, and then it'll stay there, of course, for Mrs May's arrival a little later on. And we've already had quite a strong hint from Chris Grayling that she may have quite a few things to say about the tone of the government, the kind of policy that she wants to adopt, and underlining that one Conservative philosophy. So we'll plenty for us to talk about later. But for now, Vicky, thanks very much. Lots of reaction, of course, to today's events, and a very keen eye on events here, and certainly on economic policy among business leaders and in the City of London, not least after the huge implications of that referendum itself. So what I want to do now, before we come back to Downing Street and talk to some more people, is to join my colleague Jane, who's outside Parliament with some guests there.
Thank you very much. Yes, let's talk about the many pressing issues in Theresa May's in-tray. I should explain, here at Westminster, very, very busy, as you would expect. And just until a few seconds ago, there was an extremely noisy protest going on. So if that starts again during my conversation with my two excellent guests, you will understand what is happening. But joining me here in a brief moment of calm, Nicola Horlick, welcome. Thank you for being with us, the CEO of Money & Co. And Lord Digby Jones, who was a Minister of State for Trade and Investment, ran the CBI for 6 years. Welcome both. Digby Jones, I'm going to start with you because we've had ample chance to have a very lovely chat, and you were reflecting a few minutes ago on the fact that you confidently predicted quite a while ago that Theresa May would indeed be the new Prime Minister.
Well, I did last October. I actually said in a speech somewhere that I thought the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom would be Theresa May. And remember, this was last October. This wasn't anything to do with Brexit. And it was when George Osborne was sailing high and everything else, because I just thought that the Tory party post-Cameron, because by then he said he'd be going, just needed something different, utterly different, but with some steel in it. And I think Theresa's got that in bucket loads. I'm thrilled to bits that, with any luck, by the end of November, the three most important countries in the Western world are all going to have women running them. And I am serious. I think, you know, Clinton, May and Merkel, if you can take the testosterone out of politics just for a bit, just get this away from all this stuff and bring it down to a bit of common sense with some steel. You know, this is none of them are pushovers. I just think it'll be great on so many levels, and I wish her all the better. And I don't do party politics. You know, I'm a crossbench peer in there. I don't do it, and you know, I pay short money. Short money, for the viewers, is the money the taxpayer pays to the opposition. Everybody listening to this, a taxpayer, you part with money to get Her Majesty's loyal opposition to provide an alternative government, to give voters a choice at a general election. That's what you do it for. That's why we're a mature democracy. So what do I want? I want a government that actually is doing stuff with some leadership. There's been a vacuum. Let's sort it, and I think Theresa will. And then I want an alternative government that the country can choose. And at the moment, they're actually fighting amongst themselves. And I think I applaud the Tory party the way they sorted this out in, 48 hours? They went from 5 to 1. Well done them.
Nicola Horlick, I mean, everyone talks about you as an extremely successful businesswoman. Perhaps we should just say business person. I mean, what, are we making too much of the fact that there will be a female inside number 10?
Well, no, because there have only ever been 2 female prime ministers. So, and there are many countries that have not yet had a female as a leader. And as Digby says, it could be pretty momentous if Hillary Clinton also gets elected to have 3 powerful women in the world. And women are different to men. I'm very happy to be different to a man. And women are more cautious. And there are many things that have happened in the last few years that may not have happened. For instance, the referendum may not have happened if we'd had a female leader.
But the fallout from the referendum dominates. I mean, Theresa May might have, a very brief honeymoon period, but it is going to absolutely dominate. And she's got to appoint a minister for Brexit, whatever that formal title will end up being. What's your best guess as to, who it might be? You might both have a view on that, but the enormity of that task.
Well, she said it has to be somebody who was pro-Brexit, who has that job, which seems sensible. So Chris Grayling, potentially, I don't know who it will be. But it's obviously going to be a very difficult task for that person to negotiate something that's going to be acceptable to the British public. And it is a bit of a hospital pass that Theresa May has received. And, everybody's saying it's momentous and it's wonderful, but when she gets down to the job, it's going to be a very difficult job, there's no question. Apart from anything else, it's not that unlikely that the economy will tip into recession by the end of this year. Hopefully it'll be short-lived, but things are going to be tough.
I mean, you say you don't do party politics, Digby Jones, but is there someone specific that you think you would like to see that job go to?
I actually would like to see a Chancellor, firstly, who, because that's a big issue in this, Nicola's right, it's part of the agenda. Yeah. Invest a load in the physical infrastructure and invest a load in the human infrastructure. Get the skills base of the nation up. That's how you win in Asia's century. Quality physical infrastructure, quality human infrastructure. What that means, borrow money. How do you manage that? So I'd like a Chancellor in that mould. not satisfying her political whim, and the Brexit boss, if you like, the person, I'd actually make it Michael Gove. Bright, hard-working, very principled, and I think it would do a lot for what you're trying to achieve, which is inclusion. I'd also actually just say Andrea Leadsom deserves something somewhere for not doing a Corbyn. And I think, I'm serious, you know, the country doesn't need it. And I think she ought to, she's not, you know, she has no experience, so I wouldn't put her into top jobs. But I think definitely something in Cabinet that matters. In other words, include everybody. Get us moving down the path of a degree of inclusion. And then if the Brexit initiative can bring experts in from all over the walks of life, including unions, including the Scot Nats, including NGOs, non-governmental organisations, get everybody work, because this is Britain's chance to do something global for a century. And it's not going to work if you factionalise the Tory party. It's got to be that way.
Sure, but while all of that is going on, and I'll ask both of you, I mean, Nicola Hawlett, what are your anxieties, assuming you have some, about how this country functions while those discussions, those negotiations are going on? It's about business, it's about keeping the country running. How is that achievable?
Immense anxieties, because in my view, and I've worked in the markets for 33 years, it's not really about the markets, it's about the real economy. Most people in this country actually work for small businesses, not large corporations. And it's about how they are going to be affected, how those businesses are going to be affected. We've had a fantastic run of it over the last few years. We've created more jobs than we could possibly have imagined. We have more people in employment than ever before. And it's essential, in my view, to try and keep that going. There's a great spirit of entrepreneurialism that has developed.
But how
well,
can
that's
it happen?
the difficulty, is how do you keep that going when you have uncertainty? Because actually everybody hates uncertainty, and people put off decisions when there's uncertainty. So it's very important that whoever does become in charge of Brexit actually tries to get things going as fast as possible. And there's lots of debate about when to invoke Article 50 and negotiating tactics, but really we don't want a long period of uncertainty now.
I think one of the great contributions right now is the GRS has got to finish. You know, the great remains sulk. I hope today it's the last day of it, especially in that place, and especially in the establishment. And I think Nicola's so right. You know, we've had a good run of this, we're entrepreneurial, and what we've got to do, actually more than anything else, is start talking it up and start creating some reality. I'm not quite with her on whether it'll go into recession, but for sure, growth is going to be hard to come by. And the one thing, if there was one nation on earth could afford the shock of this, it was the British economy a month ago, because we actually were in a better place than anywhere else. Right. It's going to be a mammoth task. I think Nicola's right. It's going to be down to the small businesses of Britain to pull this off, and we ought to, Tory, Labour, Liberal, everybody, pull this boat in the same direction.
Digby Jones, Nicola Hawlett, very many thanks. Great to talk to both of you. Thanks very much. More from here a little bit later. Back to Hugh in Downing Street.
Jane, thanks very much, and thanks to your guests too. So, yes, we're waiting here for David Cameron's final appearance in Downing Street as Prime Minister, outside number 10. And it is, at this point, striking to remember that at just the age of 49, he'll be 50 in October this year, he is the youngest Prime Minister to be leaving office for more than 110 years. That's worth reflecting on. Mr Cameron says he's leaving a stronger country, in his view, a thriving economy and more chances to get on in life. That gives you a sense of how he wants to define his legacy. But how will he be remembered more widely? Graham Satchell has this report.
It was just a few hours after the referendum result when David Cameron called time on 6 years as Prime Minister.
I love this country and I feel honoured to have served it.
Where you stand on his legacy depends in part on how you feel about Brexit.
Thank you very much.
History will judge David Cameron as the Prime Minister who lost Europe. Britain is out of Europe. The cost of Brexit will be felt for decades ago. That will be his legacy.
The people spoke, and he honoured the way the people spoke, and we're leaving the European Union. I think that's a pretty good legacy.
While parents worried about childcare, getting the kids to school, the balance between work and family life, we were sometimes banging on about Europe.
Turn the clock back, and David Cameron was the future once, the heir to Blair, a husky and hoodie-hugging moderniser who tried to drag the Tories away from banging on about Europe to the centre ground.
I don't support gay marriage in spite of being a Conservative. I support gay marriage because I am a Conservative.
But as Prime Minister, Cameron inherited a mountain of troubles, the financial crash, massive public debt. His response was austerity.
There is no them and us. There is only us. We are all in this together.
For some, cuts in welfare and public services define David Cameron's time in office, and again, opinion is sharply divided.
His legacy, it's food banks, it's loan sharks, and it's charity shops. What people will remember is the austerity. They will remember the cuts, the services that were lost.
He has a legacy too of record numbers of people in employment in this country, never been so high. That would be a positive for David Cameron. It's certainly in a better place than when he walked into number 10 back in 2010.
This is Witney, David Cameron's Oxfordshire constituency. Many here admire a man they describe as honourable and decent.
I think he's just been really good for our country. I think he's been a sterling leader. It's sad to see him go.
What he has done is made this country on the road to sort of getting back to how we were.
Others, a little underwhelmed.
He may well have had convictions, but they didn't really come over strongly enough.
I think he could have just been stronger.
I would attend the House of Commons for Prime Minister's questions.
History will remember Cameron as the Prime Minister who lost the referendum on Europe.
So we'll have a new Prime Minister in that building behind me by Wednesday evening. Thank you very much.
On the night he lost, Cameron quoted Enoch Powell. "All political lives end in failure," he said. Maybe, but he was still humming at the end. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
It is just turned 4 o'clock. If you're just joining us on BBC One, BBC News and BBC World, we're live at Westminster. We're in Downing Street, where in the next hour, David Cameron will leave number 10 and make his way to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation, bringing his 6 years and 62 days as Prime Minister to a formal close. He'll be making way for Theresa May, who will arrive here a little later to take office as First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Today's events are the result, of course, of the most turbulent period in British politics in living memory, a defeat for Mr Cameron in that EU referendum, and then a curtailed Conservative leadership race, which ended earlier this week when Mrs May was left as the only candidate. And that means that for the first time since 1979, a female Prime Minister will take up residence at number 10, facing immense challenges following that referendum result. And her first task will be to appoint a new cabinet, a new ministerial team. That is all to come. It's already been quite an eventful day. Just after 10 o'clock this morning, Mr Cameron left Downing Street for his final session of Prime Minister's Questions to receive tributes from his colleagues and to make his own final remarks at the dispatch box.
Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
And after that standing ovation on his own benches, more applause outside, because that was when Mr Cameron returned with his wife Samantha and their 3 children to Downing Street. They were leaving the House of Commons here, and then to spend the past few hours with staff and with colleagues, and thanking them for their support over the past 6 years. The incoming Prime Minister, Theresa May, has spent the day at Westminster preparing to make her own visit to Buckingham Palace, where she'll be asked by the Queen to form the next government. Her Majesty has spent the morning in Cambridge, visiting the air ambulance station with the Duke of Edinburgh and with Prince William, and the Queen is now back at Buckingham Palace. The expectation is that Mr Cameron will come to the Palace at around 5 o'clock, and then Theresa May will follow, becoming the 13th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign.
Yes, it is just a short drive from Downing Street to here, Buckingham Palace, and we are expecting to see David Cameron arrive here within the hour as we observe the departure of the outgoing Prime Minister and the arrival of the new one.
Yes, here we are in Downing Street. We were waiting for the formal transfer of power when Mr Cameron will be leaving within the next maybe 40 minutes or so. We're expecting a statement here in the street, and then he'll make his way to the palace, followed pretty quickly after that by Mrs May, who will arrive here and make her own statement of intent probably and set the tone for her premiership. And of course, just to underline the very significant nature of today's events, it is, of course, a transfer of power which hadn't been expected. It's all to do with the outcome of that referendum and Mrs May being the second woman in British history to become Prime Minister. Talking about prominent women in very high-profile political roles, I'm pleased to say that we have the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, joining us now from Westminster. And good to have you with us, Nicola, if I may.
Nice to be with you.
Just ask you how you see the significance of today's events, because we heard some of your colleagues in Parliament earlier today really laying it on the line and asking David Cameron to spell out the priorities for Scotland.
Well, I mean, clearly there's a sense of anger and frustration in Scotland about the fact that we have been taken to the brink of exiting the EU against our will, against our democratic wishes. So that is undeniable. That said, of course, I think all of us, politics aside, wish David Cameron well. I'm sure these are not the circumstances in which he would have wanted to leave office, and notwithstanding our many political disagreements, I understand, after almost 2 years myself as First Minister, how difficult leadership is. He served the country for 6 years now as Prime Minister, and he deserves our thanks for his service, and I, and I'm sure all of us, wish him and his family well for the future. But today is a big day, and my priority now is to seek to develop a constructive relationship with the new Prime Minister, but to make sure that Scotland's place in Europe is close to the top of the busy agenda that she now takes over.
When you have your first meeting with Mrs May, Nicola, what are you going to be saying? What's the first priority that you'll be outlining with her as far as your government is concerned?
Well, I mean, clearly there will be a range of things we want to work together on. I'll be hoping to hear a change of approach in terms of the economy, on austerity, but clearly given the magnitude of the issues we face in terms of the EU following the referendum, I will want to get a very firm assurance from Theresa May that Scotland, the Scottish Government, will be centrally involved in the process that will now take shape, but also that we will be able to be involved for a purpose, and that purpose will be to enable different options of allowing how Scotland voted to be given effect to be examined. In short, I don't want Scotland to leave the European Union. I want to be able to examine options for keeping us in the European Union, and I'll be looking for a commitment from Theresa May that the process that she will now take forward will enable that to happen.
How confident are you that that'll be the case?
Well, look, I don't underestimate the difficulties of this. I find myself, and Scotland finds itself, in a position not of our choosing and not of our making. There is enormous uncertainty and instability that lies ahead of us, but I have a mandate from the Scottish people to seek to protect our relationship with the European Union, and that's what I've got a duty now to do. So my job is to seek to navigate a path for Scotland that protects that relationship. I don't pretend it will be easy, but I think with a political will there will be a way of examining the options for doing that, and that's why an early priority in my discussions with Theresa May will be, yes, to make sure we're centrally involved in those discussions, but centrally involved in a way that allows those options to be properly explored.
Is it possible, First Minister, for there to be some kind of deal which Mrs May negotiates with the EU, where there is access to the single market, there may be some restriction on freedom of movement? Would that be the kind of scenario that would allow you to be more comfortable with the course of events?
Well, obviously we have to wait and see how these discussions take shape, but my starting point of principle is that Scotland voted to stay in the European Union. We didn't vote to exit, we voted to stay in. So that's my starting point of principle. I've said that all options must be considered to enable us to look at every option that makes that possible, and all options are on the table. So I go into these discussions with an open mind, but based firmly on that point of principle and that mandate that I've been given very clearly from the Scottish people.
We're hearing some loud voices in the background there, First Minister, and it's a reminder again that there's a lot of anger around, and when people say that, they want people to come together, it's quite a task, isn't it, at this point, given what happened in the referendum, to ensure that kind of coming together in this climate?
Well, I I think it is important that we all seek to find constructive ways forward. You know, clearly different people in different parties and different parts of the country may have different ideas about what the best way forward is. But what I'll be trying to do, while steadfastly defending Scotland's interests, is trying to be constructive in how we do things, and I hope that I can develop that constructive relationship with the Prime Minister. I mean, apart from the EU, which obviously dominates all of our discussions just now, there are a number of other issues that I hope that we see a different approach from Theresa May on than we saw from David Cameron and George Osborne. You know, one of the issues in the referendum campaign was the sense of alienation that people felt, I think, drawing largely from an austerity agenda that has seen ordinary people bear the burden of a financial crash that they didn't cause. So let's have an alternative to austerity as one of the early priorities of the new government as well.
First Minister, it's very good of you to talk to us, and thanks for doing battle with the loud voices there in the background.
They're not protesting
It's,
against
Thank
me,
you
I
very
just
much.
want to be clear about that.
You've made that clear, Nicola. Thank you very much. Nicola Sturgeon there, the First Minister of Scotland, giving us her thoughts on today's events as we wait in Downing Street for the transfer of power. 4:10 here in Downing Street. You're watching a BBC News special on the handover of power from one Prime Minister, David Cameron, to the next, Theresa May. It'll happen within the next hour and a half or so. And Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent, is with me. We were talking earlier, Vicky, about some of the challenges, and there we have Nicola Sturgeon going right in there, you know, making it very clear from the outset there are things that she needs to deliver for Scotland as First Minister, and that is top priority, to stay in the EU. It's very difficult to see where the compromise is in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, people have said about Theresa May that she is a good negotiator because she has her opinions, but she listens to people and then she can compromise, and she's not afraid to do that. But of course, how far she's prepared to go is a different matter. And the whole point about her taking over right now at a time when there are so many people talking about a divided nation, not just because of the referendum, of course, those who voted to leave, those who voted to stay, but also people predicting maybe that Scotland will have another referendum and break away, and then people talking about the economy, about the economic challenges and the differences, and we will hear Theresa May talk a lot, I think, about that, about making the economy work for everybody, for those who don't have as much as others. Now, how far she can go down that road is another matter, because if you think David Cameron said the same kind of things when he came into power, he talked about the similar things that we're going to hear from Theresa May, but his problem was he had no money because there'd been a crash and he had no majority. And Theresa May is in a similar situation because in the House of Commons she doesn't have a huge majority, so she may well have a lot of things that she wants to do. Whether she will be able to achieve those or not, you know, is another matter.
Let's just look at the images, Vicky, because this is just a few yards away from where we are now, and there's the Prime Minister's car and the security vehicle, obviously. We were just waiting for the events to unfold, but clearly at this point everyone knows that when the handover happens it'll be very efficient, it'll happen very quickly. The civil service have already been primed. Lots of the talks, as Chris Grayling was telling us, have taken place over the last few days. And as we look at these scenes, just a thought from you on the sequence of events once Mrs May goes through that door. So once she crosses the threshold and with her husband, Philip May will be with her, goes into Number 10, greeted there by the Cabinet Secretary, there'll be a long line of staff ready to applaud the new Prime Minister. That's the tradition. Straight probably into the Cabinet room, which is right at the end, and then of course the serious briefing on security and other matters. That's the normal course of events, and some important decisions to be made about Cabinet appointments. Do you expect those announcements to come pretty quickly?
Yeah, I mean, she's had not that long to think about it, but it will have occurred to her in the last few weeks or so, and I think she will certainly want to get going. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It happens so quickly when it actually starts. As you say, she walks in there, she's given a security briefing, a lot of which she will know about because she's been Home Secretary for so long. But people talk about the moment when it's made clear to you you are in charge of the nuclear weapons, for example. That's a moment when you realise you are in charge of the country. But she will want people around her who she trusts. We can see those pictures we just saw are actually David Cameron's team, who've been with him for many years, been on every visit with him. And as they depart, a new team will come in. She has to make all of those decisions, think about the people. And there's been a lot of talk about who she will have maybe as Chancellor in the door next door in number 11. You know, it's not likely to be George Osborne, we don't think. She will put someone else in there, she will have her views, and we don't know so much about her views on the economy, on foreign affairs, because she's been so much in the Home Office. We know about her views on that, but all of that is for
But
us to learn
remarkably few
about.
leaks. I mean, you know, sometimes this kind of news leaks out, but I mean, it seems a pretty tight-run operation.
Yeah, and everyone has been saying, look, when they joined up to her campaign, which they thought was going to be a lot longer than it was, she didn't offer anything. She did not say to them. I spoke to another cabinet minister who was in this position who said to me, you have no idea, when you run to be leader, suddenly there's people knocking on your door that you've never heard of before, and they're asking for things. They're asking for jobs. And he said he didn't want to do that. Theresa May has done the same thing. She doesn't want to be beholden to anybody. She will pick people who she wants around her on merit, people she knows very well, because she's been at the top of government for so long. She knows what these people are capable of. She knows the kind of people that she wants around her. And to some extent, I wonder whether the cabinet will be a bit in her mould. Of course, people in this position want people who are like-minded. She has to have Brexiteers and Remainers, men and women, but I wonder, she's not a flashy person. She's said that herself. And I wonder whether the people around her will be similar. They will be people who, like her, get on with the job. We'll have to wait and see, but as you say, not much leaking, and people who've been over the road speaking to MPs, they're all saying they might know, they're all guessing, but actually no one knows apart from Theresa May.
Interesting. Vicky, we'll talk again in a while. Just to explain to those viewers joining us now that the form of events today and the kind of formal process is well established, which is that the Prime Minister will leave number 10, will make a statement. Actually, not all of them do. Tony Blair didn't make a statement in the street when he left, but anyway, we're expecting Mr Cameron to say something when he leaves, to make that short journey to Buckingham Palace. And after that audience with the Queen ends, you'll then have Mrs May being driven to the Palace to return here. The only unknown there is how long the audience with Mrs May will last. So, you know, Gordon Brown's first audience as Prime Minister lasted nearly an hour. That's one of the longest we've known. Mr Blair's first audience lasted about half an hour. So Mr Cameron's first lasted about half an hour. So that's the kind of rough timing. And then, of course, Mrs May will come back, and we are certainly expecting the new Prime Minister to address the British people in Downing Street and to just underline the priorities that she has for her time in office, however long that lasts. So, a big focus on Buckingham Palace this afternoon. Let's join Sophie once again, who's there.
Thank you very much. It is getting very busy here at Buckingham Palace. We're expecting it to get even busier in the next 45 minutes when David Cameron arrives at around 5 o'clock this afternoon. With me here are the royal biographer Hugo Vickers and Vernon Bogdanor, who's the Professor of Government at King's College London. Good afternoon to both of you. Hugo Vickers, first of all, just explain what will happen when David Cameron arrives here this afternoon.
Well, he'll have that curious drive up the Mall, and he'll go into the palace, he'll go into the forecourt, be met by a private secretary, and quite a long walk to the Queen's rooms, which are right in the far corner. And then, of course, the Queen will receive him, and basically he will resign. She's a very important part of the Constitution. It is at that moment that he ceases to be Prime Minister.
It's a ceremony, as it were, called kissing of the hands, which doesn't actually happen, does it?
Well, that's for the new Prime Minister, who officially kisses hands. Sometimes they say that the lips brush the hands, but I don't think that even really happens. But it's the way they put it, certainly.
And
yes.
The relationship that the Queen will have with her new Prime Minister, the relationship she has had with her past Prime Ministers, because of course Theresa May is now going to become the 13th Prime Minister. How much do we actually know about it?
Well, of course, the interesting thing is we only really know anything about these relationships from the Prime Ministers themselves, who in their memoirs and occasionally and in discreet asides let out a few things. So what James Callaghan said is that the Queen offers friendliness, not necessarily friendship. She will be extremely supportive to the Prime Minister in any way she possibly can. She has a huge raft of experience, having reigned for 64 years. Theresa May will be the third Prime Minister born within the Queen's reign. Her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, born in 1874, so that was rather different. David Cameron, the first time she saw him, he was playing a rabbit in a school play. So, you know, the Queen has a lot of influence. The interesting thing is that if she asks the Prime Minister's formal advice, she is obliged to take it, and she will. But if she offers him advice, he doesn't have to take it, but he'd do well to listen, because she's probably seen it all before.
And for David Cameron today, I mean, it will all be over very quickly, won't it? Within a matter matter of 10-15 minutes.
He will probably be thinking of 2010 when he drove in for the first time to kiss hands, and now suddenly it's all over. I mean, it must seem a very short period of time. And of course, for the Queen, over the course of 64 years, I mean, it's just another one coming along, full of ideas, no doubt, full of enthusiasm, full of plans, lots of questions. She perhaps will nod sagely and wonder how much will be achieved. Who knows?
Vernon Bognor, I mean, Theresa May, second longest serving Home Secretary, she is well used to the workings of government. How much of a step up is it going to be for her, though, to lead the country?
It's a huge change. The Home Office is traditionally thought of as the cemetery of political reputations. And before Theresa May, I think there were 6 different Home Secretaries in 13 years, the 13 years of the Blair and Brown governments. But being Prime Minister is quite different because you have to be in command of such a huge range of issues. You can't afford to be a control freak. You have to delegate. And all the difficult issues come up to, including ones she may not be familiar with, such as matters dealing with the economy, which of course is quite central to politics, foreign affairs, including the European Union. Now, she's had some dealings with the European Union, but not really central to her work in the Home Office. And the important thing to remember is that every difficult issue comes to you to be resolved. If they were easy issues, they would have been resolved before they get to you. So it's quite a different job. And we can look back in British history and see people who were quite good departmental ministers, but not very good prime ministers. A good example, if we go back 60 years, it's the 60th anniversary of Suez, is Anthony Eden, who's an outstanding foreign secretary, but not a really good prime minister. And then you have Gordon Brown, an outstanding chancellor, but ran into troubles as prime minister. Conversely, you have ministers who are really not very good departmental ministers. Arguably, Margaret Thatcher, a very ordinary education secretary, but many would say an extremely good prime minister. So you cannot really tell how someone will perform as prime minister until they're actually doing the job.
And David Cameron, you taught David Cameron, didn't you? He was one of your star pupils. He was the youngest prime minister for almost 200 years to enter Downing Street, and now the youngest for, I think it's 110 years to leave. You must be disappointed to see him, your star pupil, go so soon.
Well, he'll certainly be disappointed because there's a lot of his agenda still to achieve. His main aim, I think, was to improve the life chances of the less fortunate, the so-called big society, to achieve an aspirational society in which who you were born to or which school you went to meant much less than it has hitherto. And he started on that programme, but of course it's not completed. But then, as Enoch Powell so famously said, all political careers end in failure. It's particularly sad for him, having won the Conservatives' first overall majority for 23 years in the general election last year. 1 year later, he's gone.
So what will his legacy be? Will it be as the Prime Minister who took us out of Europe?
No, his first legacy, I think, will be to make the Conservatives an electable party. We often forget that in 2005, when he became leader, the Conservatives had lost 3 elections in a row, which hadn't happened previously since before the First World War. He turned the image round from being the nasty party, as Theresa May so memorably said, to being a party which could actually win power. Then once in power, he helped restore the economy. We're now, I think, the strongest economy amongst the G8 from the difficulties that he inherited in 2010. And also he began a programme of education and welfare reform. But perhaps his greatest achievement is to create good feeling, both in government and amongst the public. You didn't have the cabinet squabbles that marred the Blair and the Brown years, and that was one of the reasons for the success of the coalition.
But do you not think that what will overshadow all of that is what has happened, the EU referendum, and losing that, a referendum he called?
I don't believe that will define his premiership, as, for example, Suez defines Eden's premiership. And remember, Eden was Prime Minister for less than 2 years. No, I think there are many other achievements, and I think it will be seen in perspective in due course that the Cameron regime was a civilised and liberal and tolerant regime, which made many people in Britain feel more at ease with themselves, though, as we saw from the referendum, not enough, particularly in the north of England.
And Hugo Vickers, let's look forward to Theresa May as Prime Minister, her new relationship that she will have to forge with the Queen. And we know that the Queen does take a huge interest in the political ongoings in Britain.
Well, she certainly does, and I think that, as I said before, she will be as supportive as she possibly can to Theresa May. I think they'll probably get on rather well. I think that Theresa May is a sort of cool, calm, intelligent person. I don't think she's particularly competitive, and I think the Queen and she will have some very, very good conversations together. The great thing is that whatever Theresa May wants to tell the Queen will remain private. There's nobody else in the room. They can talk about whatever they like. In fact, perhaps the Queen is about the only person to whom she will be able to have those conversations with.
Hugo Vickers, Bernard Bognor, thank you both very much. Back to you, Hugh.
Sophie, thanks very much, and thanks to your guests too. While Sophie was talking there to guests at Buckingham Palace, a letter published by Donald Tusk, who's of course the President of the European Council and such a significant figure now in the months ahead, given what Mrs May needs to be negotiating. Dear Prime Minister, he says, not technically Prime Minister quite yet until she goes to the palace, but dear Prime Minister, he says, on behalf of the European Council, I would like to congratulate you on your appointment as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I look forward to a fruitful working relationship and to welcoming you to the European Council. So quite a short letter, but warm, formal, but paying attention to the courtesy and the formality and saying I look forward to a fruitful working relationship with you. So we're here in Downing Street and we are expecting Mr Cameron to emerge from number 10 quite shortly, and then we'll have Mrs May coming here to take over as Prime Minister a little later on. It's worth underlining at this point that there's a lot of focus, of course, on what Mrs May has done so far in government. She's been in the Home Office for 6 years, and there's been quite a big focus, not least on the record on immigration, given that that took such a prominent part in the referendum campaign. My colleague Tom Simons reports now on Mrs May's record in government and indeed on what we can expect of her as Prime Minister.
She might have thought she had the summer to come up with a plan. No chance. Thrust into power, the dreaded inbox awaits. What will she do? Well, let's take a look at Theresa May's big leadership campaign speech, delivered just hours before she became leader. Top of the list, the B word, and a new slogan.
Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
Almost rhymes. She hasn't said yet what Brexit will mean, but there's no chance of her going back on it, and she doesn't want to be defined by it. This speech was mainly about the economy, but she barely mentioned the deficit. Cutting that defined David Cameron's government. Instead, she talked about helping people to share the fruits of economic success and industrial policy, putting workers on company boards to tackle excessive bosses' pay, and bringing in more taxes.
And it doesn't matter to me whether you're Amazon, Google or Starbucks. You have a duty to put something back. You have a debt to your fellow citizens and you have a responsibility to pay your taxes.
The key test is how much she'll intervene in the economy to reach her goals. And then there's immigration. Theresa May was the Home Secretary who failed to cut it, and so far she's made no promises. Whether she can reduce it will now depend in part on, yes, you've guessed it, the Brexit negotiations. Another challenge. Her support in the party appears broad.
Left and right, Leavers and Remainers, MPs from the length and breadth of Britain. The result showed that after the referendum, the Conservative Party can come together, and under my leadership it will.
Leaving the EU will delight the party's Eurosceptics, but if we were to end up with Brexit light, that might change. And the need for unity goes much further. In her own words, this is her goal.
It's why we will make Britain a country that works for everyone.
She enters number 10 promising radical policies for working people, people who perhaps think politicians don't stick to their promises. Brexit will be hard, but the task of overcoming that cynicism is daunting. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Tom Simons there with thoughts on what Mrs May can expect and indeed the kind of government that she might well lead. With me is one of the most prominent commentators at Westminster, Isabel Hardman, assistant editor at The Spectator. Thanks for joining us, Isabel. Let's talk about David Cameron first of all, and then we'll come on to Mrs May. When he makes the statement when he leaves Downing Street today, what will he want to be underlining at the end of this 6 years in office?
Well, he'll want to set out what he sees his legacy as being. Obviously, everyone else sees it as being the Prime Minister who accidentally took Britain out of the European Union. But there are social reforms that he'll want to highlight, maybe on free schools, for instance. Gay marriage is another thing that he really personally pursued and is very proud of. So he'll want to craft a legacy for himself, because don't forget that he wanted his second term to be about his legacy, but he never had a chance to implement that.
When we saw the scenes in the House today, there were jokes, there was standing ovation and all the rest of it, but underlining all of that was a sense of sadness and regret for Conservatives that this premiership has come to an end in this way.
Absolutely, this wasn't how David Cameron had planned it, and you could see him being very moved by some of the speeches from his colleagues. Actually, Peter Lilly in particular, he looked quite surprised at the tribute he was given by his colleague there.
These are the images earlier when Mr Cameron left Westminster. You know, you penny for his thoughts at this point, because he's leaving the House of Commons for the last time as Prime Minister after 6 years of appearing at that dispatch box. 5 years, of course, rather challenging times in the coalition government, which he and the Lib Dems made a success of. And just being re-elected, it's worth reminding viewers, it's just over a year ago.
I know.
He's the Prime Minister who, for the first time since 1992, delivers a Conservative majority. And, you know, here we are. He's basically, you know, forced out of office.
And what an extraordinary game of snakes and ladders politics has been over the past year, that you can win a surprise majority and then be leaving Downing Street earlier even than you thought in the past few weeks. On Monday, he thought he'd be leaving at the end of the summer, but actually he's had to pack his bags very quickly.
So there he is at the dispatch box, and you know, giving one of those polished performances that we're used to. And there's the departure again from a different shot there, just entering the car, and there's Samantha with him. And of course the children were there too, which was a nice sight. They were up in the public gallery. One of the daughters apparently cheering wildly when the Conservatives were clapping as well. So those are the scenes earlier. A thought now for the incomer. A thought for Mrs May, who spent 6 very challenging years at the Home Office. There are certainly people who have criticised the record there, although most people seem agreed that, you know, she's very meticulous, she's very hard-working, she's not one of these people who plays political games in the way that others do.
Yep.
What for you are the qualities that she will bring here which will possibly lead to her getting on top of things?
Well, the funny thing about this leadership contest moving so quickly is we haven't really had a chance to scrutinise Theresa May's real record at the Home Office, and we don't really know what she thinks on an awful lot of things. She's more of a sketch than a picture at the moment, and we're going to have to get to know her as Prime Minister rather than during a leadership contest. She is very no-nonsense, she's very hard-working. She doesn't have a set like Cameron, so she won't be just appointing her friends to top jobs. She's someone who appoints people who she really respects. Quite tough people she has around her as well.
Well, this was the group the other day when, of course, she acknowledged the election as leader of the Conservative Party, and of course there are quite a few familiar faces there who may well feature prominently in the government. I'm going to put you on the spot, Isabel, and say, who do you think are on the shortlist? Let's just talk about shortlists for those top 3 jobs of Home and Foreign Office and Chancellor, given that we're standing here near number 11. Who do you think is on that shortlist?
Well, I loved how keen all the MPs around Theresa May looked in that photo opportunity. It was a sort of job centre plus for Parliament, basically, wasn't it? But I think Chris Grayling, who is her campaign manager, will do very well out of having run her campaign. I think Philip Hammond is being touted for Chancellor. For instance, Justine Greening potentially for Foreign Secretary, given she was international development beforehand. Not a job she was particularly enthusiastic about, but she's worked very hard in Cabinet over the past few years, doing something that she didn't necessarily want and maybe deserves a promotion.
And do you think it'll look very different in terms of the gender balance?
Which it's been briefed that she's very keen to improve the gender balance of her cabinet. She's always been a politician who encourages women in whatever stage of politics they're at. But I think she has to worry also about the Brexit balance of her cabinet. She can't have a cabinet that has Remainers in the top jobs, so she needs to be very careful about those officers of state to make sure that there were people who campaign for Leave as well as those who campaign for Remain.
Isabel, we'll look forward to seeing what they have to say a little later, but thanks for joining us. Thank you very much. Isabel Hardman there for us of The Spectator. Here we are, and there's the bird's eye view of Downing Street for you at 4:30 in the afternoon if you're watching on BBC One, BBC News Channel or BBC World. We're covering these events this afternoon. the transfer of power between one Prime Minister and another. David Cameron shortly, very shortly we think, to leave Downing Street, to head for Buckingham Palace, past the vast expanse there of Horse Guards Parade and up to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation to the Queen. And then we expect to see Mrs May, the Home Secretary, arriving in Downing Street soon after that to take up her position as First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister. All of that to come, and not long to wait, I have to say. We're expecting some movement here within the next few minutes. We mentioned Prime Minister's questions earlier, which set the tone for the day in many ways. One of those polished performances from Mr Cameron, delighting lots of the people on the backbenches behind him, many of whom paid tribute to his leadership of the last 6 years, despite the circumstances of his departure. Let's not forget those circumstances. Eleanor Garnier reports for us now.
The youngest Prime Minister to leave office for more than 100 years. His time in number 10 cut short.
What next, Prime Minister? Are you looking forward to a rest?
After 6 years and 62 days, it is all over. Far swifter than he'd planned or expected. One last journey to the Commons for David Cameron's final Prime Minister's questions. His successor at his side and his wife and children in the public gallery.
Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Other than one meeting this afternoon with Her Majesty the Queen, the diary for the rest of my day is remarkably light.
And if he's looking to fill it, there were suggestions aplenty.
I'm told that there are lots of leadership roles out there at the moment. There's the England football team. There's Top Gear. There's even across the big pond a role that needs filling.
Jeremy Corbyn.
And rather than clashing with the Prime Minister, the Labour leader paid his compliments.
Mr Speaker, it's only right that after 6 years as Prime Minister we thank the Right Honourable Member for Witney for his service. I've often disagreed with him, but there are some of his achievements I really want to welcome and pay recognition to today. One is helping to secure the release of Shakar Amir from Guantanamo Bay and legislating to achieve equal marriage within our society.
A moment too for Mr Cameron to attempt to shape his own legacy.
We've cut the deficit by 2/3. There are 2.5 million more people in work in our country. There's almost 1 million more businesses. 2.9 million apprenticeships have been trained under this government.
And he couldn't resist a last dig at the Labour leader.
I have to say I'm beginning to admire his tenacity. He is reminding me of the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail. He's been kicked so many times, but he says, keep going, it's only a flesh wound. I admire that.
But in the end, Jeremy Corbyn wished him well. It was almost as if the two leaders had made up.
First of all, thank you for the kind remarks and the good wishes to my amazing wife Samantha and my lovely children who are all watching from the gallery today.
And there was one final thing he had to set straight about the Downing Street cat.
And the rumour that somehow I don't love Larry. I do. And I have photographic evidence to prove it. Sadly, I can't take Larry with me. He belongs to the house and the staff love him very much, as do I.
And from his backbenchers, there was admiration.
Can I first of all join with all those in thanking the Prime Minister for the statesmanlike leadership that he's given to our party and to the country for the last 6 years, and to thank him particularly on this occasion for the debating eloquence, but also the wit and the humour that he's always brought to Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday.
Angus Robertson!
But it wasn't all warm words for Mr Cameron.
The Prime Minister's legacy will undoubtedly be that he has taken us to the brink of being taken out of the European Union, so we will not be applauding his premiership on these benches.
And so it was, onto his feet for a final time as Prime Minister.
The last thing I'd say is that you can achieve a lot of things in politics. You can get a lot of things done. And that, in the end, the public service, the national interest, that is what it's all about. Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
For now, though, fond farewells. One last wave, a final goodbye, as power passes from one Prime Minister to the next. Eleanor Garnier, BBC News, Westminster.
Yes, he was the future once. David Cameron prepares now to leave Downing Street for the last time. And this is the scene for you. The world's media gathered in Downing Street, ready for the departure. The podium has just been installed, and that means that we're just a few minutes away from seeing David Cameron, possibly members of his family, leaving Downing Street for the last time as Prime Minister after 6 years and 62 days in office as First Lord of the Treasury and as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So it's a very, very significant day in political history because of the circumstances in which this turnover has come about and in which this transfer of power has come about. So let's stay on these images. Vicky Young is with me, our chief political correspondent. We think back to previous occasions, Vicky, being here on the day that Tony Blair arrived and indeed left, and that Gordon Brown took over, and of course setting the tone on departure and on arrival is absolutely essential.
Yeah, it is, and I think they, as politicians, feel it's a very big deal. We're hearing that he's coming out right now, actually. I'm just going to move out the way, but his people are telling us he's about to come out.
Well, the door will open quite soon.
And the staff are gathering behind us as well.
We are now being told that the door will be opening in just a few seconds, and David Cameron will emerge to signal the end of his premiership as he prepares to tender his resignation to Her Majesty the Queen at Buckingham Palace. Leaving office at the age of 49, the youngest Prime Minister to leave office in over 100 years. He came to office at the very young age of 43 back in 2010. Spending 5 years in coalition with the Lib Dems, and of course last year at the election gaining that first Conservative majority, albeit just 12 seats, a majority of 12, for the first time since John Major scored that majority for the Conservatives in 1992. So a very significant achievement for him just last May in 2015. And today having to come out to confront the world's media and to say goodbye to Downing Street and to say goodbye to government after his time in office. I'm sure that he'll have some very memorable words to share. And here comes the Prime Minister with members of his family. Thank you. Samantha and the 3 children.
Good afternoon. When I first stood here in Downing Street on that evening in May 2010, I said we would confront our problems as a country and lead people through difficult decisions so that together we could reach better times. It's not been an easy journey, and of course we've not got every decision right. But I do believe that today our country is much stronger. Above all, it was about turning around the economy, and with the deficit cut by 2/3, 2.5 million more people in work, and 1 million more businesses, there can be no doubt that our economy is immeasurably stronger. Politicians like to talk about policies, but in the end it is about people's lives. I think of the people doing jobs who were previously unemployed. I think of the businesses that were just ideas in someone's head and that today are making a go of it and providing people with livelihoods. I think of the hard-working families paying lower taxes and getting higher wages because of the first ever national living wage. I think of the children who are languishing in the care system and who've now been adopted by loving families. I think of the parents now able to send their children to good and outstanding schools, including free schools, that simply didn't exist before. I think of over 200,000 young people who've taken part in National Citizen Service, the fastest growing youth programme of its kind in the world, something that again wasn't there 6 years ago. I think of the couples who've been able to get married who weren't allowed to in the past. And I think of the people on the other side of the world who wouldn't have had clean drinking water, the chance to go to school, or even be alive, were it not for our decision to keep our aid promises to the poorest people and the poorest countries in our world. And we've used our stronger economy to invest in our health service. When I walked in there, there were 18,000 people waiting over a year for their operation. Today, it's just 800. Too many, still too long, but our NHS is a national treasure and one whose staff perform miracles, as I've seen, every day. And we've strengthened our nation's defences with submarines, destroyers and frigates and soon aircraft carriers rolling out of our shipyards to keep our country safe in a dangerous world. These are the choices and the changes that we've made. And I want to thank everyone who's given so much support to me personally over these years. The incredible team at Number 10, the civil servants whose professionalism and impartiality is one of our country's greatest strengths, and my political advisors, some of whom have been with me since the day I stood for my party's leadership 11 years ago. I want to thank my children, Nancy, Elwyn and Florence, for whom Downing Street has been a lovely home over these last 6 years. They sometimes kick the red boxes full of work. Florence, you once climbed into one before a foreign trip and said, "Take me with you." Well, no more boxes. And above all, I want to thank Samantha, the love of my life. You have kept me vaguely sane, and as well as being an amazing wife, mother and businesswoman, you have done something every week in that building behind me to celebrate the best of voluntary service in our country. We will shortly be heading to Buckingham Palace to see Her Majesty the Queen, where I'll tender my resignation as Prime Minister. And I would advise Her Majesty to invite Theresa May to form a new administration. I'm delighted that for the second time in British history, the new Prime Minister will be a woman, and once again a Conservative. I believe Theresa will provide strong and stable leadership in fulfilling the Conservative manifesto on which we were elected, and I wish her well in negotiating the best possible terms for Britain's exit from the European Union. Let me finish by saying this. The spirit of service is one of this country's most remarkable qualities. I've seen that service day in, day out in the incredible work of our armed forces, our intelligence agencies and our police. It is something I always knew, but as Prime Minister you see it so directly that it blows you away. And of course, writing those heartbreaking letters to the families who've lost loved ones is a poignant reminder of the profound scale of what these men and women give for us in the defence of our freedoms and our way of life. We must never forget that. In a different way, I've seen the same spirit of service in the amazing contributions of countless volunteers in communities up and down our country who are making our society bigger and stronger. And I'm proud that every day for the past 2 years, I've used the office of Prime Minister in a non-political way to recognise and thank almost 600 of them as points of light whose service can be an inspiration to us all. For me, politics has always been about public service in the national interest. It is simple to say, but often hard to do. But one of the things that sustains you in this job is the sense that, yes, our politics is full of argument and debate, and it can get quite heated. But no matter how difficult the decisions are, there's a great sense of British fair play, a quiet but prevailing sense that most people wish their Prime Minister well and want them to stick at it and get on with the job. So I want to take this moment to say thank you to all those who've written letters and emails offering me that support, people who I'll never get to meet and never get to thank personally. It has been the greatest honour of my life to serve our country as Prime Minister over these last 6 years, and to serve as leader of my party for almost 11 years. And as we leave for the last time, my only wish is continued success for this great country that I love so very much. Thank you.
David Cameron embraces Samantha and the 3 children on the threshold of 10 Downing Street. Applause from the staff and the colleagues who have been with him for the last 6 years. And Mr. Cameron defined his legacy in his own terms, and set out his achievements as he would like them to be seen. So the children make their way into one of the cars as Mr. Cameron one last look along Downing Street at the massed ranks of the media here, but more importantly for him, at all of his friends and colleagues and staff who are wishing them well as they embark on the next phase of their lives. So for the last time into the Prime Ministerial car, Mr. Cameron glances again along Downing Street, acknowledges the applause, fully aware of the import of this occasion and what it means for him, the end of his premiership after 6 years, in circumstances that he would never have wished. And the Prime Ministerial cavalcade now making its way down along Downing Street. And some crowds gathered at the gates of Downing Street, some of them wanting to voice support, others wanting to voice displeasure at what they see as Mr. Cameron's record in government. And on past the Scotland office and then Horse Guards, the Horse Guards building there on the left, beyond it Horse Guards Parade, where Mr. Cameron has attended Trooping the Colour the last 6 years as Prime Minister in June. And then up towards Trafalgar Square, ready for the great sweep under Admiralty Arch, and then down along the Mall, the great processional route which leads directly down to Buckingham Palace. Lord Nelson surveying the scene in Trafalgar Square, and then a left turn under Admiralty Arch, which these days is privately owned, but was of course from 1912 a very grand part of the government property portfolio in central London. Making their way now slowly down the Mall, with Buckingham Palace directly ahead. They go down switching lanes, as is the Prime Minister's right, along towards Buckingham Palace. Vicky Young is still with me, our chief political correspondent. And just a quick thought, Vicky, at this point on the nature of the Prime Minister's statement here in Downing Street.
I think there must be a part of him really wondering how this happened, how it happened so quickly, that he's leaving here in the way that he didn't want to leave because of that vote on the European Union. But he will want to make sure that his legacy stands, that it is more than just that Brexit vote, talking about those in society who don't have as much as others, talking very much on a personal level about employment, about saying they're not statistics, these are people who have jobs, how he wanted to help them, talking about gay marriage and about equality. These are the things he wants to be remembered for, not that Brexit vote.
We'll talk a little more about Mr. Cameron's statement later, but they're heading towards the palace. They're crossing the side of St James's Park there, and my colleague Sophie is at Buckingham Palace for us to look at the arrivals there.
Indeed, the Prime Ministerial cavalcade just arriving here at the Victoria Memorial. It is just a short drive to Buckingham Palace from Downing Street. The Prime Minister, his wife Samantha, and their 3 children in a separate vehicle arriving here at the gates of Buckingham Palace. David Cameron, who arrived in Downing Street at just the age of 43, the youngest Prime Minister for almost 200 years, now becoming the youngest to resign, the youngest since 1895. So they sweep across the forecourt at Buckingham Palace into the inner quadrangle, where they will be greeted by the Queen's equerry and a lady-in-waiting. I'm joined here as well by Hugo Vickers, who is the royal historian, and also by our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell. Talk us through what will happen now.
You know, Sophie, I remember being there in the quadrangle 6 years and 2 months ago when he arrived to be appointed. There were no escort group, there were no motorcycles from the special escort group of the Metropolitan Police. He got stuck in the traffic. Here he is now with his wife, and we think with the children in the people carrier behind, being greeted by Wing Commander Sam Fletcher, the Queen's equerry, who will escort the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister alone. The Prime Minister's wife will be greeted by a lady-in-waiting, Lady Philippa de Pass, and she will be taken into an ante-room while the serious business is done, while the Prime Minister, as he still is, goes in.
And the children there behind them. I think I'm right in saying this is the first time that we have ever seen Prime Minister's children come as the Prime Minister tenders his resignation.
Yes, of course, we saw Gordon Brown leave with his children from Downing Street, but they didn't come to Buckingham Palace for the audience at which Mr. Brown resigned. But the entire family going in, the first time really we have seen the Cameron children in public, on public display, if one can use that word, in this way. So now into the palace, they will be taken up to the Queen's private audience room, where it will just be David Cameron and Her Majesty the Queen, and he will tender his resignation. Once that has been done, then certainly Mrs. Cameron and I would imagine the three children, Nancy, Elwyn and Florence, will also be invited into the audience room to spend perhaps just a few minutes with the Queen as she talks about, well, what will they talk about? We never know.
We never know.
What are their plans now? I mean, Hugo, you know more about this sort of thing than perhaps many people. But it's remarkable. It remains terribly private, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that's the great advantage of having a constitutional head of state like the Queen. The Prime Minister, the departing Prime Minister, they can chat away happily with each other, and it is private, and perhaps that's the only person to whom a Prime Minister can unburden themselves of all their various problems and so forth with the sure knowledge that it won't go any further. Occasionally, of course, Prime Ministers write their memoirs and they tell us that they got on particularly well with the Queen. We'll have to take their word for it because we certainly don't ever hear it from the Queen herself.
David Cameron did speak just last year, I think it was, about the audience that he has with the Queen and how he finds it almost like therapy. He was able to talk to her about things he couldn't talk to anybody else about.
Yes, and he's not alone in that. I mean, I think that is the great advantage because, of course, the Queen has been seeing state papers for 64 years, and David Cameron was only born in 1966. I mean, the Queen had already been on the throne for 14 years before David Cameron was even born. So imagine the experience that she has. You know, I think that is the most fascinating aspect of it. When the Prime Minister, if he gives her formal advice, she will take it, but if she advises him, he doesn't have to do it, but he'd do very well to listen.
And the weekly audiences, which take place every Wednesday when Parliament is sitting, I mean, we don't even know how long they go on for, but presumably the Queen, the monarch, does get to know her Prime Ministers fairly well in that time.
Yes, she does, and I think also the fact that she will ask them various questions means to say that they have to be sort of really up to speed with what's been happening since the last audience. And so I imagine that helps to focus, you know, what they really want to say, because they've only got a limited period of time, and it's a bit like reporting to the headmistress, if you like, as to what's been going on.
I would be very surprised, you know, if the Queen hadn't been watching on television the statement that the Prime Minister made in Downing Street, and putting aside all political considerations, it was quite a poignant moment to see the Prime Minister declaring his love for his wife, praising her for the support that she has given him throughout his prime ministership, and seeing the three children there, and what must they have made of the ranks of photographers there and the attention which they don't normally see.
Because they've very much been kept out of the limelight during his whole 6 years.
Yes, and we in the media would always make a point of not identifying them, because that's our obligation. But on this occasion, as Gordon Brown did when he departed from Downing Street, there was the family tableau of them all making their way with the children, with their mother and their father, to Downing Street. I don't suppose necessarily the children have met the Queen before. They see their father going off every Wednesday evening to see the Queen. They must hear him very discreetly, I'm sure, talking about the Queen. But there they are, all now inside Buckingham Palace for this audience, this family group, but of course with this huge constitutional significance. This is the moment when David Cameron is resigning.
And he tenders his resignation, Hugo, but he also advises the Queen to appoint Theresa May as the next Prime Minister.
Well, yes, and when Theresa May gets there, what the Queen will be asking her is, you know, are you in a position to form an administration? Well, we know the answer to that. She is indeed in that position. Interestingly, many, many years ago, when Harold Macmillan took over after the Suez Crisis, he told the Queen, I might only last 6 weeks. And he revealed later that 6 years later, she reminded him of that remark that he'd made all those years ago.
But this is a very big constitutional moment, clearly.
Oh, it is,
but
yes.
the Queen's role in this, I mean, she's very much, she has no role in who will be the next Prime Minister, but that wasn't always the case.
No, in the early days, part of the reign, the royal prerogative was such that if there was any doubt about a Prime Minister, she would take soundings from various sort of grandees of the party, people like Marquess of Salisbury and so forth, and take advice as to who she should call. Now, of course, they've changed all that, and it's all absolutely arranged by the party, and indeed by the members of Parliament, and also sometimes, if Theresa May had this election, would have been the members of the Conservative Party out in the country who would have decided who the next leader was, and so forth. So the Queen is a very important part of the Constitution. There are three elements. There's the elected House of Commons, there's the House of Lords, which is in a way the chamber which tidies up the legislation, and they are not elected, and then there's the Queen, who is there by hereditary right, but no bill becomes an Act of Parliament until she finally signs it. So in other words, nothing can actually happen till it reaches her, which means a lot of people see it along the way.
The palace realised that the monarchy was in danger of damaging itself in both 1957 and 1963, when the monarch, the Queen, was to some extent involved in choosing who the next Prime Minister was going to be. Now, I thought it was interesting that David Cameron said that he would resign and then he would tender his advice to the Queen that she call upon Theresa May. I mean, strictly speaking, once he has resigned as Prime Minister, his advice counts for nothing, because it's not advice with a capital A which the monarch must follow, and it is one of the areas on which the Prime Minister is disallowed really to offer advice, because it is one of those very few circumstances in which an outgoing Prime Minister may have a motive in offering advice which may not necessarily be in the best interests of the country. It is perfectly clear on this occasion who the Queen will send for. In fact, that person has already been sent for. Theresa May, even now, will be waiting, with
the engines
her chauffeur.
Will be idling.
Yes, the
Absolutely.
chauffeur with the engines prepared to scoot up here with her husband as soon as, or almost as soon as David Cameron has left. But yes, it is very clear on this occasion who is to take over, and very shortly, because I noticed that the Camerons arrived at Buckingham Palace at 9 minutes to 5, so we're about 8 minutes into their attendance at Buckingham Palace. Very shortly they will be leaving. I don't think we're going to see the changeover of cars, which on some occasions in the past there was, that the outgoing
for example,
Prime Minister leaves behind his prime ministerial limousine. I would imagine that he will leave in the same vehicle. I don't know, we'll have to see, because clearly in these times outgoing Prime Ministers continue to have considerable security, just as an incoming Home Secretary will have had the security apparatus around her, and most particularly in these recent days when it was clear that she was about to become Prime Minister. So,
but in terms of what we're going to see in the next few minutes, very little. Clearly, there are no cameras inside that palace. But when David Cameron became Prime Minister, for the first time there was a photograph issued, wasn't there, shortly after, just within 10 minutes, of the Queen and David Cameron, and that was the first time they'd done that.
There is a photographer, a Press Association photographer, I think, in the audience room who will be there for the first few minutes, both, I believe, of David Cameron's leave-taking and of Theresa May's audience, at which she will be asked, as Hugo has been explaining, are you in a position to form a government? Yes. Would you therefore please form a government? And then there is the shaking of the hands, and that's it. And then that would be the point during Theresa May's audience when one would imagine that her husband will be invited in. So it'll be interesting to see just how long the audience with the Camerons takes. I don't suppose it will be terribly long, because David Cameron, of all people, will be aware of the need to have a new Prime Minister in place, that she will be anxious to get back to Downing Street to make the statement outside Downing Street in exactly the same position as Mr. Cameron was making his leave-taking statement. And, I was struck, I must say, it was quite personal, a bit political at times, looking back on his administration, but saying no more red boxes. And one sensed an area of relief in his voice. And
the children kicking the red boxes,
yeah,
as he said.
Yes.
The youngest one even wanting to get into one of them, go abroad with him.
Humorous to the last. And it was a very human family gathering there, wasn't it? With Florence, I think, the eldest, Nancy, the eldest daughter, just sort of looking and gazing and taking in all that was happening around her father, the Prime Minister. Gosh, what memories for those children.
And it is all over so quickly. This audience, we expect, will not last terribly long. We're expecting Theresa May within, I don't know, the next half hour, certainly. And then for David Cameron, it's done.
Well, it's an extraordinary process. I mean, as Nick was saying, it all happens incredibly quickly. I mean, think about those children. Until a couple of days ago, they were, that was their home, and they were likely to stay there for some time. And David Cameron himself, of course, was very much, I think, looking forward to a sort of tour around Europe, to going to different places and saying goodbye, and all that's been denied him by the sudden decision that Theresa May will be the Prime Minister.
We should just point out, lest people get slightly confused, there is a meeting of the Privy Council taking place at Buckingham Palace tonight, and there are a lot of police motorcyclists whizzing around, whistling their whistles to stop the traffic. But there is a meeting of the Privy Council taking place, so we don't believe that any of these vehicles that you may be catching sight of contain Theresa May. It would not be the done thing for her to arrive before David Cameron has left.
No, it is all very much orchestrated, isn't it? In that she will not leave the Cabinet Office until David Cameron has left the palace.
Whether it's that somebody from Buckingham Palace phones up to say Mr. Cameron, not the Prime Minister, has now left, so give it a few minutes and then you can come on up. But yes, the choreography of this is something the palace doesn't do it very often, but this is what officials, that's what they do. They're in touch to make sure that this choreography goes as smoothly as possible. But amongst the Privy Councils who are going to Buckingham Palace, and it's a reminder that the normal business of government continues, despite the fact that we are changing Prime Minister. There is a routine meeting of the Privy Council taking place at the Palace tonight that the Queen will be attending after she has appointed her new Prime Minister. So that is taking place at the moment. And amongst the Privy Councillors, I think, attending the Council tonight is Chris Grayling. Well, now, he might well be wanting to rather stand by his phone to see what messages might come through, but actually he's got to attend a meeting of the Privy Council. So the inner quadrangle of Buckingham Palace, and no sign of anybody coming out of that portico to the right of the picture there.
So shortly, one chapter comes to a close, a new chapter begins. Theresa May, who will come here very soon, will be the Queen's 13th Prime Minister. Yes. The UK's second female Prime Minister, and that is going to be an entirely new relationship because, as we understand it, Theresa May does not know the Queen that well. She must have met her on a number of occasions, but a whole new relationship. How much do we actually know about how the Queen has got on with her Prime Minister's past?
Well, as I say, the only way we know it is what the Prime Ministers themselves have told us. Harold Wilson, for example, told us that he got on terribly well with the Queen. Sometimes, of course, a certain amount of information comes out through letters that are published, because certainly when Winston Churchill and indeed when Harold Macmillan stepped down, the Queen wrote very, very nice letters to them, thanking them for helping her. In those days, of course, she was a very young Queen, guiding them. In the case of Macmillan, she made a very big point of saying, you have had to help me through a lot of family problems. There were a lot of family issues which came up during the time that he was Prime Minister. Actually, going back to what Nick was saying, talking about the advice that was given, Harold Macmillan actually summoned the Queen to the Edward VII Hospital while he was still Prime Minister to clinch that Alec Douglas-Home should take over instead of Rab Butler. The interesting thing then was, which shows the way these things happen, that he was quite ill at the time, and after this rather tiring audience, he then went out snooze. The next thing he knew was a man from the GPO coming around trying to take away his scrambler telephone. And when he said, couldn't this wait, they said, no, that's the rules. So his scrambler telephone was disconnected. The symbols of power and all those things disappear very, very fast.
It has been an incredibly turbulent time in British politics, most turbulent in living memory. The Queen, we know, is very engaged in political life, in what is going on. She's very interested, and she will be even more so at this point.
Well, absolutely, and I think one of the great things about the Queen is I always think she should be called Elizabeth the Steadfast, because all through her reign she's had such a clear vision of what it is to be our Queen. She's also a tremendously good conciliator, and at times like this, when things are very turbulent and up in the air, she's a very calm presence, and I think that is one of the great things that she's done. I mean, she said it when she went up to Scotland, everybody should calm down and stay calm and carry on is very much her message, and I think she's very good at that, and I'm sure she will be a great help to Theresa May. Of course, interestingly, she'll have the chance to get to know her a little bit better at the end of August, because David Cameron's invitation to Balmoral will presumably now be given to Theresa May and her husband. They will go up there for the traditional visit to Scotland of the Prime Minister and his wife.
That was a deeply, deeply coded message that the Queen uttered at the opening of the Scottish Parliament, no reference actually to the referendum or to the explicitly to the fact that we are going through an uncertain time, just this message encouraging politicians to take time and be calm. And there are those, and let's be frank about this, who have said that at this time of great uncertainty, the head of state might perhaps have said something rather more explicit to calm nerves. That's not the Queen's style, and her great success rests so very much on the fact that she does step back completely, and even at a time of such uncertainty, unprecedented in our recent memory, she chose not to say anything that was clearly and explicitly a reference to the referendum and the aftermath. In contrast, of course, to the aftermath of the Scottish referendum, when she did issue a statement urging the country and the different sides to come together. This was, I think, too difficult, too sensitive, still too political for her advisers and her to feel that there was anything appropriate that she could say.
That, of course, is conciliating as well, isn't it? Though that's what she was doing, is conciliating. And of course, actually, on a slightly different issue, if you remember the time when the Princess of Wales was killed, when she made that very good speech from the Chinese dining room, which we can see in front of us. You can listen to that without any embarrassment these days, all these years later. It was very calm and very measured.
I suspect we just saw a Privy Councillor trying to go in the wrong gate into Buckingham Palace.
Because they are actually using a different gate today,
aren't they?
Well,
The North Centre Gate, which is where they normally go in, is having sort of roadworks or repairs done to it. So they're all going in the South Centre Gate, and we can see this, there we are, this rather lost, perhaps, Privy Councillor, we hope that it's not Theresa May, finally finding its way in through the correct gate. But as you were saying, I mean, when Theresa May does come, one of the other things, and as Hugo was saying, we are reminded of the consistency and the constancy of the Queen throughout the 64 years of her reign now, and the advice, the wisdom perhaps that she can offer, having had such a long perspective. And we remember that Winston Churchill, the first Prime Minister, was born during the reign of Queen Victoria. We now have a third Prime Minister about to be appointed who wasn't born when this reign began. The first of those Prime Ministers was, of course, Tony Blair. Gordon Brown was born before the Queen's reign started. David Cameron, of course, wasn't. The youngest Prime Minister appointed at the age of 43. He's not yet 50. He's not 50 until October. So his premiership is done at the age of 49. But now Theresa May, who is 59 herself, shouldn't really give away ladies' ages, should we? But she's 59, so born since the start of the Queen's reign.
So we're waiting now still for the Camerons to emerge. I mean, they've been in there now for 10, 15 minutes, I think I make it. When David Cameron goes to see the Queen, presumably he's in there now, but it will be him on his own, tending his resignation. Afterwards, the expectation is that Samantha Cameron and the children, as we've seen them go in, will also be invited to say a few words to the Queen.
They certainly will. The first part obviously is formal and private and has to be that way. But afterwards, I suspect that the Queen will have a certain amount of sympathy for the young children and their mother, and will probably send them away from the palace all feeling a little bit better, because after all, they've lost their home, they're going to go into a different place. It's going to be very confusing, and this in a way is a sort of rite of passage. It's the sort of thing that the Queen does very well. I mean, going back to what Nick was saying, very interesting. Winston Churchill, born in 1874, David Cameron, born in 1966. It's almost a century apart.
Yes.
Amazing.
It is extraordinary.
I mean, it is to be hoped that Theresa May is not superstitious. She is the 13th Prime Minister being appointed on the 13th
of July
of the month. But she doesn't look the superstitious type, does she, really? But still, I think it's they went in at 9 minutes to, so it'll taken a couple of minutes for
20 minutes.
So, yeah, it's pretty much 20 minutes. I would have thought that very shortly now we would see the Camerons leaving Buckingham Palace.
And then when Theresa May does arrive, presumably within the next half hour, what will happen then? What is the process? How long could that take?
Well, I think the formal part, again, will be very brief. She will be taken up to the audience room by the Queen's equerry, and I'm sure that the Queen's Private Secretary, Sir Christopher Geidt, will also be there in evidence. But just the Queen and Theresa May will be in the audience room together, and as we've said, the Queen will ask her just formally, are you in a position to form a government? And then she will ask her. would you please form a government? To which Theresa May will say, yes, OK.
Do you think
and now we have a slight difference on this kissing of hands
Well, I read
business.
the memoirs of Tony Blair, in which he said that his lips had to brush the Queen's hand, but then perhaps I shouldn't take what he says too seriously these days. At any rate, it is a great opportunity for the Queen to have a chat with the new Prime Minister. I mean, it'll be quite informal, I think, at that point. I mean, she may very well want to ask her one or two pertinent questions, but I think it'll be it's more of a sort of formal occasion, as Nick says, and then with a slightly sort of social element later. I think there's plenty of opportunity for them to talk about the more serious issues later on. I mean, I don't think the Queen will be asking her to name her cabinet, although Theresa May wish to tell the Queen one or two people she's chosen. Who knows? We don't know, and that's the great thing about it.
And then she will presumably have her first audience with the Queen next Wednesday. Parliament is still sitting, and
yes.
Theresa May will arrive back here at the Palace for longer, in-depth discussions.
She will, and she'll find the Queen extremely well informed. I mean, the ministers have often been caught out by the Queen. They've always said that if they don't do their homework properly, she catches them out. And she has one question that she asked with great theatrical timing, which is, "Are you sure?" And they'd better be sure.
I would think that the Queen might take this opportunity. Look, we don't know, but given that the Queen will be going to Balmoral quite soon, given the seriousness of the situation, I would have thought that she might well want to just start to get a sense of what Prime Minister May's intentions are on these massive issues and challenges that she now faces. There will certainly be another audience next week, but very soon after that, as I say, the Queen will be going off to Balmoral for several months, and although Prime Minister May will be invited up to Balmoral, that isn't generally until the end of September. So the Queen, who, as we have said, is very fully engaged as head of state and will want to know what her new Prime Minister's broad intentions are. Perhaps what is going to be your strategy. The Queen will be interested, and I'm sure that she will have some questions that she will hope to have outline answers to. At the same time, the Queen, I'm sure, will be mindful that this is a huge step up for Theresa May, albeit that she's been Home Secretary, albeit that she's been a member of the National Security Council and all these other weighty offices. For anybody to be stepping into the office of Prime Minister at this particular time. It was just yesterday that Sir Nicholas Soames was saying that he couldn't remember a time when a Prime Minister was starting their administration facing greater challenges than Winston Churchill, his grandfather, had faced in 1940. Now, of a completely different order. We were facing a war of national survival then. But there is no doubt, I think, that Mrs. May has huge challenges to face, and I think that it is reasonable to conclude that the Queen will want to get some sort of sense of how are you going to tackle this? What sort of ideas do you have about how we should go about it? Still no sign. Policemen outside Buckingham Palace. Not great crowds. A lot of tourists and just sightseers who've been coming past us wondering what on earth is going on. And we've just been telling them, well, the Prime Minister is about to resign.
So we understand as well the other Houses of Parliament, and we understand that the Prime Minister-to-be, Theresa May, will be leaving from the Houses of Parliament shortly. That is where she is at the moment. Crowds gathering there as well, and a car waiting at the entrance. So that is where she will set off from, presumably not until she has been given the all clear, as it were, not until she's been told that David Cameron has left Buckingham Palace, which we are expecting fairly shortly.
But don't you think that the Queen at least has the privilege of not being rushed, and if she wants to chat to David Cameron and his family for a little bit, she will do so, and why not?
Yes, because Gordon Brown spent a very long time, didn't he?
He spent a long
Queen?
time, yes. And there's one other thing which perhaps I shouldn't say, but I'm quite keen to, is that you know that Mrs. Blair was always sort of very unkeen to curtsy to the Queen. I mean, there's a story that at Balmoral, the Queen Mother saw Mrs. Blair greeting the Queen and said, "Stiff knees, stiff knees." But when somebody told me that when Mrs. Blair left, when the Blairs were leaving, she came downstairs saying, "And I curtsied to her." So I think in a way, funny enough, the Queen always wins in the end.
Well, I'm not going to get into that debate at all. But, I mean, curtsying, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, Margaret Thatcher was always deemed to be the deepest curtsier of any person who met the Queen. And she did it with considerable panache. But that is an interesting relationship, isn't it?
It is.
The relationship between our only previous female head of state, female head of government, and there are different views on that, and I'm not sure that anybody really, apart from the Queen obviously, knows the truth
don't think we will ever know,
of the nature of that relationship. But I think it is fair, is it not, to conclude that there were ups and downs and there were difficult periods, not least because of the Queen's commitment to the Commonwealth and all of the difficult moments that there were as a result of that in South Africa.
I quite like the story that Mrs. Thatcher was worried that she and the Queen had turned up in the same outfit, same colour outfit, and sent a message saying, would it be possible perhaps to have some advance notice as what the Queen was going to wear? And the message came back, the Queen never notices what other women wear. She wasn't going to have that. But what I would say to you is that there is evidence that the Queen was supportive, because as soon as Mrs. Thatcher left, she gave her the Order of Merit, which is in her personal gift and is an extremely serious and very, very important decoration. Later on, she made her a Lady of the Garter, and of course she was appointed to the House of Lords. So she really had all the possible honours that she could possibly need.
So just to say that we are now waiting for David Cameron and his family to emerge from Buckingham Palace. David Cameron having, we think, already tendered his resignation shortly afterwards, and it all does seem to be choreographed very tightly. Shortly afterwards, we expect that Theresa May will leave the Houses of Parliament and climb into the vehicle there waiting outside, which will bring her and presumably her husband, Philip May, to the palace, where she will then be asked by the Queen to become the new Prime Minister.
You do get the impression that that driver, that car, is just waiting for the word to set off. But this audience is certainly taking, I mean, it's best part now of half an hour since the Camerons arrived at Buckingham Palace, and no sign that we can determine that they are about to leave, but I can't think that it would be very much longer.
But by all accounts, from what David Cameron has said about his relationship with the Queen, it has been a very mostly warm relationship. No doubt he will want to, she will want to spend some time with him, with his wife, with the children, who, as we say, are I think the first children to be there as a Prime Minister offers their resignation.
Yes, I think the Queen, as I say, I think she can take as long as she likes chatting to them. I mean, and will perhaps want to ask him all sorts of questions as well. I mean, it's a good opportunity for a debrief. She's probably not going to have such an opportunity again for a while. She can, of course, call upon him at any time in the future because he's a Privy Councillor, but there's not much evidence that, in fact, she does that sort of thing these days.
I think it would be hard to imagine that the Queen and Mr. Cameron haven't got on. I mean, he is, again, leaving aside whatever you think of his politics, he is a very personable, quite humorous, an easy character, it might be said, to warm to, which hasn't been possible to say that about every person who's occupied the office of Prime Minister during her reign. And I think that there have been some individuals in that office with whom she has found it very difficult to strike up a rapport. There have been some who've been very friendly, very gregarious, with whom one imagines the Queen has enjoyed those weekly audiences. Others who've been rather harder work. Well, I can't imagine that it's been very hard work with Mr. Cameron. There was one terrible faux pas, as we know, after the Scottish referendum, when he disclosed something of the nature of the conversation that he'd had with the Queen to the, what was it, the Mayor of New York. And, of course, he, I'm sure, got quite a telling off for that. And he was extremely embarrassed because he knew that he had really made a mess of that. But I think other than that, I would imagine that their relationship has been a good and cordial and constructive one, as between the head of state and the head of government. Now, it remains to be seen whether the dynamic of the new relationship between the Queen and Prime Minister May, it's going to take them time to get to know each other, just as any two individuals, as chairman and chief executive, which essentially is what this relationship is akin to, a non-executive chairman and a chief executive. But they're going to have to really break through and get to know each other, given the seriousness of the situation that Mrs. May is facing and her government.
Well, we have seen, haven't we, going from what you said, that he's not very good with microphones. He sometimes forgets that they're around. I think this, apart from the time when he was going into Downing Street the other night, humming. There was another time, of course, when another private conversation quite recently was picked up, wasn't it? When he was talking to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So perhaps good advice would be to be aware that microphones are quite dangerous.
Right,
things.
a statement from Buckingham Palace just now. The following announcement is issued by the Communications Secretary to the Queen. The Right Honourable David Cameron MP had an audience of the Queen this evening and tendered his resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which Her Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. So we know officially and formally that Mr. Cameron has resigned.
The scene at the House of Commons where Theresa May, until now Home Secretary, has just left the Palace of Westminster and is now circling Parliament Square on her way to Buckingham Palace for that audience with Her Majesty the Queen to be invited to form a new government as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury. So Mrs May, the husband Philip, are already on their way. They were waiting there in the Palace of Westminster for the signal from Buckingham Palace that the audience with the Camerons had ended, and ended with that statement that Nicholas Witchell has just relayed to us, which is that Mr Cameron has formally resigned as Prime Minister. That resignation has been accepted by Her Majesty the Queen, and the call has gone out from the Palace to invite Mrs May to come along and to attend an audience with Her Majesty where she will be invited to form a new government. So a different route to the Camerons. They're going down Birdcage Walk on the other side of St James's Park. They'll be passing Wellington Barracks on the left, and then they'll be at Buckingham Palace in just a few seconds' time. St James's Park, a magnificent sight at this time of year, all the trees. A great vantage point for those tourists and others who are there today wanting to look at the exciting political events of the day. And they're now seeing Britain's new Prime Minister, Britain's incoming Prime Minister, making her way down towards Buckingham Palace for this transfer of power. And then once the audience has taken place, and who knows how long Mrs May will be there, could be a good 20 minutes, half an hour. Once the audience has taken place, we will then be waiting for Mrs May's departure from Buckingham Palace and the return not to the Palace of Westminster this time, but to Downing Street. And to enter Downing Street as the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and then to address the people of the UK, and indeed to send a message out to people beyond the shores of the United Kingdom, to outline her principles and her thoughts and her philosophy as she prepares to cross the threshold of Downing Street into number 10 to become the new Prime Minister. So just passing Wellington Barracks there, and then ready to turn into Buckingham Palace. There are quite a few crowds around the Queen Victoria Memorial, and I'm told that the outgoing Prime Minister, Mr Cameron, has just left, so split-second timing as one Prime Minister leaves. Having resigned, the incoming Prime Minister makes her way into Buckingham Palace. So some crowds around the gates there and the entrance to the palace. They'll cross through under the archway into that forecourt, ready to be greeted by the Queen's private secretary and other palace officials, who will have everything ready for this first audience for Mrs May as the incoming Prime Minister. The first of many, no doubt, because she'll be here on a weekly basis to have that audience with the Queen. That one-to-one, where we've been told so many times in the past by Tony Blair and John Major and many others, that it's a conversation where the Prime Minister feels that he or she can open up and have a very uninhibited conversation with Her Majesty about the pressures and challenges of leading a government, especially in such turbulent times. Theresa May is greeted at Buckingham Palace. Philip May, her husband, accompanying her. And after a brief greeting, they're being shown in to meet Her Majesty for that audience. And there's the scene for you today in central London. Buckingham Palace, Green Park there to the right, and St James's Park to the left. And this is the route, I'm no doubt, that Mrs May will be then following a little later along the Mall and back to Downing Street itself, ready for that first prime ministerial statement by Theresa May here in Downing Street. Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent, is with me here in Downing Street. Let's stay on these images because it just gives us a sense of the geography, of course, for those who need it, which is that Buckingham Palace, they're just a mile away or so from Downing Street, just a few minutes drive in the car. So she may be in there for 20 minutes, half an hour, Vicky, because, you know, this is the first audience as the incoming Prime Minister, so I'm sure there'll be quite a bit to discuss at this point.
Yeah, and this is the part that we never get to know about. You know, politicians don't really talk about the Queen very much, apart from when they sometimes accidentally do. I can't imagine Theresa May coming out and telling them what they were discussing. I mean, she's probably met the Queen before, but this is obviously a huge, momentous moment for Theresa May, taking over as Prime Minister far more rapidly than she would have thought. It's happened, you know, within 2 days, going from thinking she had a long leadership contest, which she may or may not win, to suddenly being told there are no other contenders, you will be the next Prime Minister. And here she is, and this evening she'll take over, walking into number 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister for the first time. So there's an awful lot for her to talk about. I'm sure, of course, the issue of the EU referendum will be uppermost in her mind. And she takes over at a time when many people are discussing the idea that it's a divided nation, not just because of the Brexit vote. 48% who wanted to remain, 52% who wanted to leave. Also talking about what happens with Scotland, with Nicola Sturgeon, who you were talking to earlier, suggesting that it might be the time for another referendum. Could the United Kingdom break up? And then the divide amongst people when it comes to the economy. And it's something David Cameron has talked about. It's something I'm sure Theresa May will talk about, trying to do more to make sure that the economy works for everybody. She's very keen to talk about this one nation conservative agenda. She wants to help those at the bottom. She wants to talk about social justice. She wants to talk about life chances. The idea that from whatever background you come, that you can reach the top. And she will, I'm sure, be putting a big emphasis on that when we expect her to come back here and make a short speech here in Downing Street a little later this evening.
Let's stay on these images because for those of you joining us on the BBC News Channel and on BBC One and on BBC World, Theresa May has now arrived at Buckingham Palace for the audience with Her Majesty the Queen, where she will be invited to form a new government as Prime Minister. Mrs May entered just a few minutes ago. Let's stay on the images of the palace because we don't want to miss anything there. And I'm going to bring in the Conservative MP Michael Ellis, who's been Mrs May's Parliamentary Private Secretary. He's in Westminster for us. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We're staying on the images of Buckingham Palace. You know Mrs May, you worked with her very closely. Tell us a little bit about how you see today's events.
Well, Hugh, it's a historic moment. We have now the 13th Prime Minister that Her Majesty the Queen will have had serving under her. And I frankly think that it is a deeply historic moment in many different ways. You know, Theresa May is the first Home Secretary to go straight to being Prime Minister since Palmerston in 1855. She broke records in her tenure in the Home Office. She served for over 6 years, one of the longest periods for 100 years. And I think she's going to be a Prime Minister who continues to break records because she's clearly someone who is deeply committed to public service. She's deeply committed to duty. She is the daughter of a vicar. I think she almost certainly learned a lot of that public service and social responsibility from her late father. And I think we've got a lot to look forward to in challenging times, Hugh, because clearly we have circumstances that are quite turbulent at the moment in politics. So that would be a polite way of putting the last 3 weeks. But she's more than capable, in fact extremely capable, of dealing with anything that the political situation throws up in this country, and I think we'll see a very effective Prime Minister in Theresa May.
You choose the words, Michael, challenging, and you look, indeed, you say turbulent. I'm just wondering, from your experience of working closely with her, tell us a little more about the qualities that you think will lend themselves well to the very challenging role that she's now taking on.
Well, Hugh, she's unflappable. She's completely professional and businesslike in all of her dealings. Don't forget, she's been in charge of MI5, the British Security Service. She's been in charge of a Home Office with 40,000 employees, and we know, don't we, those of us who follow Westminster affairs, that the Home Office is sometimes considered something of a poisoned chalice. It's a very challenging department of government, but she has dealt with those issues extremely competently. She's very highly regarded in the Home Office, including by the civil service. She's deeply respected across the Conservative Party, which is why I think she's able to follow this unifying agenda, because she also is respected on the benches opposite. So we see someone who can deal with crises very well. She's unflappable, she is deeply experienced, and someone who can deal with any of these issues that may come up in the months and years ahead.
Can I ask you, Michael, to share maybe a bit of the behind-the-scenes knowledge of the last couple of days, because since the leadership race ended so abruptly earlier this week, so what has Mrs May been doing now for the last couple of days? How much of that has been to do with trying to get a plan into place so that when she steps into Downing Street today, it's all happening straight away?
Well, I can tell you one little anecdote, Hugh, of the last couple of hours, which is that I went past the Prime Minister David Cameron's office just a couple of hours ago, and if I tell you the House of Commons staff had already taken down the signs saying David Cameron Prime Minister from outside his office, inside the House of Commons, that's actually one clear indication of how sudden it's all over for the outgoing Prime Minister David Cameron. But in terms of Theresa May's conduct over the last couple of days, it is, as it always is with her, entirely professional and businesslike. I saw her behind her desk at the Home Office yesterday, working on urgent Home Office papers, and I know she was doing the same thing this morning and having meetings of one sort or another. She has a close circle of officials and others who work with her and who have her trust, but she has a wide circle, a very wide circle of people who admire and respect her within both the civil service and within the whole political scene. So she's very dutiful, Hugh, in everything that she does. She's up late at night working on papers, dealing with a very large number of meetings that she's had over the last couple of weeks. I've seen that nothing is allowed to interfere with her duties as Home Secretary. Papers have been going in, files have been going in to be signed, and meetings have had to take place. Nothing is allowed to interfere with her duty, and she's someone who takes her responsibilities very seriously indeed.
Michael Ellis, as ever, good to talk to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Michael Ellis, there, the Parliamentary Private Secretary to Theresa May. Well, who knows what role he might have in the new setup here in Downing Street and indeed across Whitehall. So these are the images of Buckingham Palace this afternoon, because this is where Theresa May has just arrived in the last 10 minutes or so for that audience with Her Majesty the Queen, where she will be invited to form the next government after David Cameron's departure. We heard from Mr Cameron a short while ago in Downing Street, setting out what he saw as the main achievements of his government over the past 6 years. And of course, overshadowing everything, the circumstances of his departure, which were ones that he would never, ever have wished upon himself, or indeed, I suspect, from his point of view, on the country, because he made his view very plain on the outcome of the referendum itself, though, of course, he accepted the democratic verdict of the British people. Let's stay on the images while the audience is going on, and we'll see Mrs May emerging shortly to come back to Downing Street to make that statement. Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor, has now joined me here in Downing Street. And Laura, first of all, before we see Mrs May emerging here, a thought on Mr Cameron's final message in Downing Street.
Well, you know, Hugh, what I thought listening to him more than anything else actually is just these are these big moments when we remember that politicians are human beings. They're human beings out bringing his children out for the first time to see the world's press in the same way that Gordon Brown did back in 2010. And you could tell his voice slightly cracking with moments. You know, politics is a hard life. People volunteer for it, but it is a difficult job. It puts all awful pressure on people, and you could see that on the faces of his children and the faces of his wife, and that was an extraordinary moment. But in terms of his political legacy, very clear what he wanted to highlight. Equal marriage, something very controversial in the Tory party, but that has changed things for many, many people. Other achievements, sorting out 2/3 of the deficit, the economy always at the heart. Not their original ambition, but what they would say is significant progress. And I think he did want to delineate those things he feels are achievements, of course, before other people write his legacy for him.
Of course, as they're busily doing in any case.
As they're busily doing, as we've all been talking about for the last 10 days or so.
When we see Mrs May emerge in a short while, and then she'll make her statement here, we're expecting her to address the British people. What are the themes that you expect her to be underlining?
Well, here's the big interesting thing. Theresa May is no stranger to high office. She's been Home Secretary for 6 years. People know who she is, they know what she does, they don't know very much about her, and they don't necessarily know what she's going to do. So this is going to be her first big national introduction. Now, everything we've heard from her since this all began, only a couple of short weeks ago, has been about trying to bring people together, both the Conservative Party but also the country. And time and again she said under her the government will be a government that represents everybody. Now that sounds something that's very lofty, very, very difficult to achieve, particularly in a time when, you know, there's still going to be extreme pressure on government budgets, and more than anything else, her government will still have a majority of only 12. So however she wants to try to deal with the country's problems, however she wants to try to introduce new ideas of her own, they are going to have to get through her party at a time when there's plenty of people in her party who are grumpy, and they're quite prepared to work with each other if they don't like what she's suggesting.
Laura, thanks for now. We'll talk again in a while, and certainly we'll be obviously following every step of the way back from Buckingham Palace to Downing Street when that happens. Let's join Sophie once again, who's there with some guests.
Yes, there was applause as Theresa May and her husband Philip May swept in through the gates here at Buckingham Palace just over 10 minutes ago. We've noticed already that the black vehicle she arrived in seems to have been changed for a prime ministerial vehicle, which is sitting outside in the quadrangle there in the palace, waiting to whisk her back down the Mall to Downing Street. And Nick Witchell, it was an extremely efficient changeover. The Camerons, they missed them by seconds.
It was almost 2 split seconds, wasn't it, actually? They almost collided with each other outside the south centre gate of the palace. One sensed that Mrs May's driver was going as slowly as possible coming up Birdcage Walk. Did you notice that she, as Home Secretary, as she was then, has only the one police outrider guiding her up to Buckingham Palace and in, as we saw with her husband, as you mentioned, into the audience room where they now are. One must imagine that by now she has been appointed Prime Minister. They have been in there. They arrived at 5:25, so
these are images of them arriving then.
13 minutes ago, yes, the images of them just before 5:25, making their way. How slowly they're going, because I imagine that they will know that the Camerons still have not actually departed from Buckingham Palace, and we were starting to wonder whether they had slipped out some rear exit from the palace. But there they are, making their way very slowly, whereupon the former Prime Minister came out, still with all of his police outriders, and they very nearly did sort of collide with each other there. But the whole procedure, the whole process is underway. The Queen will by now have invited her to form a government.
And it is as simple as that. It is a very simple...
Yeah, there is no
audience.
Ceremony. There are no seals, there's no kissing of hands. The Queen will simply have asked, are you in a position to form a government, by which is recognising the criteria of the Prime Minister, that it must be someone who commands the confidence of the House of Commons. And if that person's answer is affirmative, then the Queen will invite that person to form a government. And clearly, Theresa May, as the leader of the largest party, the Conservative Party, is in a position to form a government. And so one would imagine that Mr May will now have been invited into the audience room, and this whole process of the Queen getting to know Theresa May rather better than she has had an opportunity to do whilst she has been Home Secretary will be underway. They don't know each other terribly well. As Home Secretary, clearly there have been meetings. They have met at lunch quite recently after Privy Councils at Windsor Castle. But as Home Secretary, she will not have known the Queen terribly well.
With me here as well as Vernon Bogdanor, Professor of Government at King's College London. This presumably for Theresa May. It's a huge moment for the country, but for her, of course, personally a huge moment too. But this is the moment that she will really know that she is stepping up, that she is now leader. She is in charge of this country, and presumably you can never prepare yourself for that.
Absolutely. However effective you have been as a departmental minister.
Let me just show you, before, sorry to interrupt you, because we have got, there you are, Theresa May. The first image that we have, Theresa May curtsying to the Queen, presumably shortly after she was asked to be the next Prime Minister of this country. But as I say, a huge moment for her as well, stepping up.
Well, I was about to say that however much you think you're prepared for it, you can never be really prepared for it, however successful a departmental minister you have been, because as Prime Minister you have to deal with a whole range of issues, some of which you won't have been acquainted with before. In Theresa May's case, she's never held an economic portfolio, either in government or in opposition, and although she's had some connection with the European Union as Home Secretary, she hasn't had a foreign affairs position either. Now these, of course, are the key issues of modern government, so there's no way really to predict how well a Prime Minister will do until she's actually started the job.
Well, let's go back now to Downing Street, because Hugh is there, and that is obviously where Theresa May will be heading shortly after she leaves the palace.
Sophie, thanks very much, and Laura Kuenssberg's still with me, and let's just stay on this image for a while, Laura, because this is the most powerful statement we've had so far today, and before Mrs May turns up in Downing Street, this is the moment Theresa May becomes the new Prime Minister.
Indeed, that's the image that tells us the deed is done. The Queen has extended her formal offer, her request to Theresa May to become the country's political leader. She has accepted. She has knelt, and one would assume done the kissing of hands ceremony that politicians have to indulge in at these kinds of audiences, and this is an image that will go around the world. We'll see it time and time and time and again for years to come. Big smile on the Queen's face, and Theresa May also looking pretty overjoyed with it. But as you say, this is the image. It has now happened. Theresa May is now the Prime Minister.
And just to underline one remarkable fact, we mentioned it earlier today, but Mrs May is the 13th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign. She wasn't born. She wasn't born when the Queen ascended the throne. So just a fact, of course not the only one. Mr Cameron and Mr Blair were in the same category too, but at the age of 59 anyway, Theresa May has become Prime Minister. So that's the image of the afternoon so far, because Mrs May has now accepted the Queen's invitation, and she's now left behind the Home Office where she's been for the past 6 years. Let's talk to someone who also spent time at the Home Office and indeed spent time as leader of the Conservative Party, Michael Howard, Lord Howard, who joins us now. Michael, thank you very much for joining us. Your thoughts on today's event so far?
Well, they've been rather momentous, haven't they, Hugh? An extraordinary day. I think David Cameron has been an extremely good Prime Minister, and in many ways I'm sorry to see him go. I think Theresa May will also be a very competent and a very good Prime Minister.
When she makes her statement, Michael, when she turns up in Downing Street in a short while, maybe within the next 20 minutes or half an hour or so, what would you like her to be underlining in terms of the kind of philosophy that will underpin her time in Number 10?
Oh, I wouldn't dream of giving her any advice, Hugh. She's her own woman, she's a very strong woman, and she'll be a very strong Prime Minister. She knows exactly what she wants to do, and she's the best person to articulate that.
Let's ask the question in another way.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Let's see. Are you back with us now, Michael? Are you back with me now, Michael?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you so much. Well done for recovering. I'm just wondering, let's turn the question around. On the question of handling the British exit from the European Union, what is the message you'd like to hear?
Well, she's already said that Brexit means Brexit. She's been very clear about that. And of course, that's the #1 item on her agenda. And I've no doubt that that's going to take a lot of her attention in the coming weeks. I personally think that the negotiation of our exit from the EU can be relatively simple and straightforward, but we'll have to see how she plans to deal with that.
From your experience of the Home Office, and then you see how she's handled things over the last 6 years, What are the qualities, in your view, that she brings to this job now at such a turbulent time?
She's very steadfast, works extremely hard. She's on top of the detail. I've had a number of things to do with the Home Office in the last few years, and Home Office officials have spoken very, very highly of her. I think she's a very strong woman, and she'll be a very strong Prime Minister.
And in your dealings yourself, Mr. Howard, over the years, I'm just wondering again, because we hear so much about the fact that, very few people know much about Mrs. May, and I'm thinking about those millions of people watching this who don't know a lot about her at all. What would you convey in terms of the kind of woman who's now about to become Prime Minister?
She's very straightforward. I think in many ways what you see is what you get. And there's no side to her, there's no showiness about her. She's straightforward and she'll get on with the job.
Michael Howard, good to talk to you as ever. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Lord Howard there, the former Conservative leader, the former Home Secretary, giving his thoughts on Theresa May's arrival today as Prime Minister. Laura Kuenssberg is still with me. The audience, I'm told, is just about to end at Buckingham Palace, Laura, if it's not ended already. And we've seen the Prime Ministerial car waiting there. So this is the moment now for this return journey back towards Whitehall and Downing Street. Mrs. May will have prepared the statement that we're about to hear, but really to reflect probably in this car, she'll be reflecting on what is ahead of her.
Indeed, and how quickly it's all happened. Theresa May had always been very private about her ambition, but look, no question, she has wanted to do this job for a number of years. And quietly, some might say stealthily, she had planned in some way for it, but she had not planned for it in anything like the way that it has happened in the last couple of weeks. She was looking at a leadership contest over the summer that she hoped very much she would win. Time to develop her ideas, perhaps. Certainly time to develop her plans. And now, in the next few moments, the nation will want to hear exactly what she's all about. What does she want to do? Who is she really? Because she's somebody who's well known, because she's been in charge for a long time, but not very much about her is known. So no doubt right now she might just be wondering how on earth this all happened when 3 weeks ago this must have seemed like a very far off possibility.
The sense of urgency as well, isn't there, in a way? I'm just saying that because this audience, if it has just ended or is about to end, is significantly shorter than some audiences in the past when the Queen has greeted an incoming Prime Minister. I think Gordon Brown was there for best part of an hour. So, again, maybe, let's not read too much into it, she's keen to come back and get stuck into business.
Well, she always says that she just wants to get on with the job. But you never know, it might also have something to do with wanting to hit the schedules of the television news programmes in time for families sitting down to watch the TV tonight. Who knows? But no question, look, there is a sense of urgency about this. Theresa May is not a politician who wants to do flash. She's not a politician who wants to do gimmick. She's a politician who people say she wants to sit down with her red boxes, go through the detail, go through the arguments, come to a decision, perhaps after some time. But once she's reached that decision, she's certainly very firm about it, no question apart from that. She was perhaps, shall we say, affectionately described by Ken Clarke, of course the former Tory Chancellor, as being a bloody difficult woman. She responded to that rather cleverly a couple of days later, saying, well, yes, the European Union are about to find out that I am a bloody difficult woman, playing that to her strength. But one thing that's interesting about all of this, just as we see the cars waiting for her to come down the steps inside the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, Theresa May is somebody who's famed for caution. Well, in number 10, you have to decide. And you often have to decide things very, very quickly. And it may well be that that is a real gear shift for Theresa May. It's a very different job. You can't be in a bunker. You have to be out there. Although I think she'll take a very different attitude to how much she pops up in public. I don't think we're going to see Theresa May giving interviews celebrating the success of Andy Murray at Wimbledon or talking about her favourite football team, for example. I think she's going to guard her profile very, very carefully and perhaps pop up rather more rarely than Prime Ministers of recent years.
It's going to be very interesting, Laura, not just to gauge the tone of this address that's coming up in Downing Street very shortly once Mrs. May has left Buckingham Palace, but also to see if there are any pointers very soon as to who will be holding some of these great offices in government. Home Secretary, the job that she's just vacated, Foreign Secretary, such a crucial job when you think of what's ahead in these negotiations with the European Union, and of course Chancellor of the Exchequer when you think of the economic impact, potentially, of the Brexit vote. So they're very, very important appointments, even more than usual.
Indeed, they always are, but right now, probably more than ever, perhaps certainly for many decades. You know, a few politicians in the last couple of weeks have said to me, look, whoever becomes the next Prime Minister is taking on a set of challenges that is the greatest since just after the war. Now, not everybody would agree with that analysis, but there are people who are smart people around here who believe that to be the case. In the last couple of hours, I've talked to some of the ministers who are nervously waiting by the phone. At about 4:30, those calls had not been made yet at that stage. But of course, as ever, there's been huge speculation about who will fill those top offices. Lots and lots of guessing games there. But there, look, another image popping up. Huge smiles on both of their faces. And I suppose Theresa May has been a Privy Councillor for a long time. So again, they will have met on many occasions. This will not have been the kind of encounter where they're sort of meeting for the first time or having the opportunity to have a proper conversation for the first time. But striking how much they are really both looking really to be enjoying that moment very, very much indeed.
So those are the scenes in Buckingham Palace just a few minutes ago. These images have just been released by the Buckingham Palace staff. This first audience for Mrs May as Prime Minister at Buckingham Palace. Back here in Downing Street, I'm bound to say, where Laura is with me, we've had another little movement of the furniture, because as the cars are ready there in Buckingham Palace for the departure, everything will now be getting ready for this statement. And Laura, the podium's back in place. That tells us something.
The podium is out. That is always the moment that the press corps gathered here love the most. It means often after hours of waiting that the thing everybody has been standing around for is absolutely about to happen. And always to a moment in the sun for the sound recorders here in Downing Street who gets a chance to test the microphones and test the camera shots. But certainly, given the short distance we are away from Buckingham Palace, it will probably be only now a matter of minutes before we hear from Theresa May for the first time in her new job. What I don't think we'll hear is announcements of who are going to be part of her top team, but we do expect that by later this evening we all have an idea of certainly the main jobs. Although, who knows, she may well surprise us and give us some of the details when she speaks this afternoon, but that would be extremely unusual. This moment is about her introduction to voters who, don't forget, haven't chosen her. Tory MPs expressed a very clear preference. Tory members didn't even vote on it because others dropped out of the race, but the general public have not had a chance to have their say on Theresa May as Prime Minister. And that may well be in her mind this afternoon.
So this is the scene at Buckingham Palace, and the Prime Minister's car is ready to leave, and by Prime Minister I mean Theresa May, not David Cameron. He's resigned in the past half hour. The Queen has accepted his resignation, and she's now invited Theresa May to form the next government, and Mrs May has accepted. The Palace has formally confirmed that, and the Prime Minister's official car is now ready to leave. Mrs May, we expect to emerge from Buckingham Palace within the next minute or so, because everything is now ready here in Downing Street for the new Prime Minister's arrival and for the statement to be made in Downing Street before Mrs May goes into number 10 to start the business of running this government. The audience took place within the past 20 minutes or so. Lots of smiles. The Queen listening to what Mrs May had to say. Mrs May accepting the invitation from Her Majesty to form this government. The 13th Prime Minister, by the way, of the Queen's reign, starting with Sir Winston Churchill back in 1951 when the Queen came to the throne, followed by Sir Anthony Eden and then Harold Macmillan, Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, who was there for less than a year, Harold Wilson, Edward Heath, Harold Wilson again, and then James Callaghan, who came in 1976, followed of course by Margaret Thatcher in 1979, and then John Major, and then Tony Blair, and then Gordon Brown, and then David Cameron, who has resigned today. So there you have the run of Prime Ministers of the Queen's reign. So, as we expect Mrs May's departure from Buckingham Palace, let's join Sophie once again.
Yes, we are still waiting. Theresa May, who has been inside the palace now for just over half an hour. We've seen those images of her with the Queen. It's a new thing for us to see what happens when the Queen invites the next Prime Minister to lead the country. It started with David Cameron.
The digital revolution. thank goodness for digital cameras. They can get the images out so quickly. And, of course, the interesting thing, just as we're waiting, is that, as you mentioned before, the car has changed. There are the images from the audience room of Prime Minister May with the Queen, but just a moment ago we saw that the vehicle outside is no longer the black BMW in which she arrived as Home Secretary, but it is the silver Jaguar in which she will leave as Prime Minister in a few moments after, well, it's half an hour. So they certainly are beginning to get to know each other, and an important opportunity, clearly, for both of them to just start to get the measure of each other.
And Vernon Bogdanor, Professor of Government at King's College London, we have now our 13th Prime Minister, and what a task in hand she has.
She takes office in very turbulent times indeed. She's there because of a popular insurgency against the government in the recent EU referendum. And there's really been nothing like it. It's very difficult to compare it with any previous episode in British politics. Perhaps 1945, after the war, when the public decided not to re-elect Churchill, but to elect a Labour government instead. Now, I'm not comparing David Cameron with Churchill, but nevertheless, it's a huge popular upheaval. So she faces that difficulty. Then she faces the problem that she's got to ensure Brexit, though she was in the Remain camp. Now, she has said Brexit means Brexit, but the Brexiteer MPs will be scrutinising her very carefully indeed. And then she has to face a further difficulty, which is not of her making, that she comes to power through a coronation, as Gordon Brown did in 2007. She wanted a contest. She said she didn't want a coronation, but as we know, Andrea Leadsom, the other candidate, dropped out. And this may mean that some people say, well, she hasn't really got proper legitimacy. Perhaps she ought to call a general election to find out what the people think, because we now know as a result of the referendum that what happens outside Parliament is as important as what happens inside.
And now there we are, the new Prime Minister. The first time we have seen Theresa May as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, stepping into the car alongside her husband, Philip May, and being driven out of the quadrangle at Buckingham Palace. Just over half an hour she spent with the Queen. A moment of history as she passes there onto the forecourt here at Buckingham Palace in front of a rather small crowd, it has to be said, but there was applause when she swept in, and no doubt there will be applause as she leaves this palace in the next few seconds.
And of course, after the pleasantries with the Queen, a certain amount of business, I'm sure, was discussed, very much straight down to work. Now, I'm just waiting for the statement from Buckingham Palace, which I'm sure that they will be issuing within the next few moments, just confirming the events that we know have taken place there. But the Prime Ministerial motorcade making its way now down the Mall.
And it's making its way back down the Mall, the route which David Cameron took when he arrived here at Buckingham Palace, and we do now have a statement from the palace.
The Queen received in audience the Right Honourable Theresa May MP this evening and requested her to form a new administration. The Right Honourable Theresa May accepted Her Majesty's offer and kissed hands upon her appointment as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury.
Well, Theresa May, new Prime Minister, heads down the Mall towards Downing Street, so let's go straight there. Hugh Edwards.
The new Prime Minister making her way along the Mall, down towards Admiralty Arch, and along to Downing Street, where there's a vast crowd of the world's media waiting to put on record her transition from Home Secretary to Prime Minister. Laura Kuenssberg still with me, and this is the moment, Laura, where you just wonder what the thoughts are in that Prime Ministerial car.
Indeed, what is she saying to Philip May, her husband, in that car? What are they talking about? What are they wondering about? One thing that's worth putting is that she's got at least 3.5 years, she says, if there's not a general election until 2020. Of course, the law changed under the coalition to have the Fixed Parliaments Act. She sees this, those close to her tell me, as her opportunity for it to be a Theresa May administration. David Cameron might have won the election, but she now has the bulk of the time to do with it what her priorities are, what she decides to do. And I think we are going to see this tension. She wants to provide continuity. She's all about stability, safe pair of hands. But at the same time, a huge political opportunity, 3.5 years, to stamp her mark on government, to stamp her mark on the country, and that might give us some clues in the reshuffle. You know, there have been suggestions that it will be very much steady as she goes. A lot of people might stay in their jobs. Certainly, some people will stay in the same positions, but I think at the very top of government, some of the big names will be shipped out, and she will be very keen to say this is her administration. This is not some substitute for things gone wrong when David Cameron lost his gamble on the referendum.
Prime Minister's cavalcade rapidly approaching the turning for Downing Street. They're on Whitehall at the moment, passing the old agriculture building, passing the Wales office and the Scotland office, and getting ready to turn right, as it will be for them, into Downing Street itself. The gates have been opened. There's a crowd outside wanting to see this historic event. And Theresa May is within seconds of entering Downing Street as the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Past the Cabinet Office, where so much of the workings of government take place, and there we have the crowd on the corner. And we can see the outriders entering Downing Street right now as the new Prime Minister sweeps into Downing Street. And here we are on the 13th of July 2016, and Theresa May is to become the 54th Prime Minister in British history, the second woman to cross the threshold of Downing Street as Prime Minister. 37 years after Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May acknowledges the presence of so many journalists and camera people, knowing that these images will go around the world, accompanied by her husband Philip.
I have just been to Buckingham Palace, where Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government, and I accepted. In David Cameron, I follow in the footsteps of a great modern Prime Minister. Under David's leadership, the government stabilised the economy, reduced the budget deficit, and helped more people into work than ever before. But David's true legacy is not about the economy, but about social justice. From the introduction of same-sex marriage to taking people on low wages out of income tax altogether, David Cameron has led a one-nation government, and it is in that spirit that I also plan to lead. Because not everybody knows this, but the full title of my party is the Conservative and Unionist Party. And that word unionist is very important to me. It means we believe in the Union, the precious, precious bond between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. But it means something else that is just as important. It means we believe in a union not just between the nations of the United Kingdom, but between all of our citizens, every one of us, whoever we are, and wherever we're from. That means fighting against the burning injustice that if you're born poor, you will die on average 9 years earlier than others. If you're black, you're treated more harshly by the criminal justice system than if you're white. If you're a white working class boy, you're less likely than anybody else in Britain to go to university. If you're at a state school, you're less likely to reach the top professions than if you're educated privately. If you're a woman, you will earn less than a man. If you suffer from mental health problems, there's not enough help to hand. If you're young, you'll find it harder than ever before to own your own home. But the mission to make Britain a country that works for everyone means more than fighting these injustices. If you're from an ordinary working class family, life is much harder than many people in Westminster realise. You have a job, but you don't always have job security. You have your own home, but you worry about paying the mortgage. You can just about manage, but you worry about the cost of living and getting your kids into a good school. If you're one of those families, if you're just managing, I want to address you directly. I know you're working around the clock. I know you're doing your best, and I know that sometimes life can be a struggle. The government I lead will be driven not by the interests of the privileged few, but by yours. We will do everything we can to give you more control over your lives. When we take the big calls, we'll think not of the powerful, but you. When we pass new laws, we'll listen not to the mighty, but to you. When it comes to taxes, we'll prioritise not the wealthy, but you. When it comes to opportunity, we won't entrench the advantages of the fortunate few. We will do everything we can to help anybody, whatever your background, to go as far as your talents will take you. We are living through an important moment in our country's history. Following the referendum, we face a time of great national change. And I know, because we're Great Britain, that we will rise to the challenge. As we leave the European Union, we will forge a bold, new, positive role for ourselves in the world. And we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us. That will be the mission of the government I lead, and together we will build a better Britain.
A very clear statement of intent by Theresa May, who now steps into 10 Downing Street with her husband Philip. The start of her period as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, succeeding David Cameron at the age of 59, becoming the second female Prime Minister in British history. It is an extraordinary moment. Laura Kuenssberg is with me to reflect on this moment. Laura.
Well, a very strong statement from Theresa May about her intentions as a Conservative Prime Minister, starting as she just goes into number 10, and you can probably hear just there the traditional applause from the staff inside number 10, who clap in Prime Ministers as they arrive. But a statement really of very bold intent from a Conservative Prime Minister, talking of social justice, a message she said she was sending directly to people around the country who may be just managing. Repeatedly, she directly said, "We'll think of you. I'm thinking of you." This was not something from a traditional Conservative, she praised.
Not at all.
Not at all. It was almost a speech that could have been delivered by a very modernising Prime Minister from a very different party.
Yes.
Perhaps, maybe deliberately, maybe not, but there were phrases in there, sentiments in there that could have been delivered in a different era by Tony Blair. That idea that if you work hard, we will look after you. Very clear messages from Theresa May. And this framework that she had come up with, to use the full title of the Tory party, the Conservative and Unionist Party. Not just about the union between Scotland and England, which she spoke of very passionately, almost the first point she made. Interesting, and very interesting in itself, given what's going on with that. But the unionist sentiment of the country being a union between all of its citizens. But I just wonder, Hugh, given how difficult the political context is, chants, loud chants from protesters at the end of Downing Street, a little hint of many of the political dangers to come. She looked confident, a very strong message, but this is not going to be an easy ride.
It's not going to be an easy ride, and one wonders now, she's being introduced to all the staff there, the Cabinet Secretary, the head of the Civil Service, taking her through some of the most important elements, the security briefing. That's all happening right now in Downing Street, and then there'll be some big decisions about who does these big jobs, who fills these big posts. When can we expect some news on that?
I'm expecting the first big names this evening. So Foreign Secretary, Chancellor, Home Secretary, and potentially who is going to be in charge of the renegotiations of our position within the European Union. How do we leave the EU? How is that all going to work? Now, as with reshuffles, it may well not go according to plan, but that's the timetable we're expecting, with the rest of the cabinet positions being fulfilled tomorrow.
Because those names will tell us a great deal about the kind of stance that she wants to take in some of these big areas.
Absolutely. Very often, you know, governments are who the people are. The selection of her team will be extremely important. Now, of course, as ever, Westminster has been consumed with a guessing game about who is going to be where. The wide expectation from the second most important job, the Chancellorship, is that Philip Hammond, currently the Foreign Secretary, appears to be the most likely candidate to move in next door to number 11.
Seen as another safe pair of hands?
Another safe pair of hands, and one of the few politicians who's thought to be genuinely close to Theresa May. Their constituencies aren't that far from each other. They've known each other for a long time, but very much in that sort of modus operandi, I suppose. Somebody who thinks about decisions carefully, then makes them, and then sticks to them once he's made them. But from that kind of part of the Conservative Party, in the middle, but not necessarily somebody who's seen as radical or somebody who's seen as flash. But there was quite a radical note to that speech, maybe not what everybody had been expecting.
Certainly not. We'll talk a bit later, but Laura,
We
thanks
will.
very much for now. Well, stay with us, because in a moment, Fiona will be here with BBC News at 6. But what an afternoon. We've had David Cameron resigning, and we've had Theresa May arriving in just the past few minutes here in Downing Street. She is now inside number 10 as Britain's new Prime Minister, with a very clear statement of intent about social justice and some of the principles that will inform her premiership. It's been quite a day, but there are very, very interesting and possibly, again, tense and challenging times ahead. I'll leave you with some of the great images of the day. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.
What next, Prime Minister? Are you looking forward to a rest?
Other than one meeting this afternoon with Her Majesty the Queen, the diary for the rest of my day is remarkably light.
There are lots of leadership roles out there at the moment. There's the England football team. There's Top Gear.
Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once. It has been the greatest honour of my life to serve our country as Prime Minister over these last 6 years.
The government I lead will be driven not by the interests of the privileged few, but by yours. We will do everything we can to give you more control over your lives.
You're in cold water, you're not going to last long.
Meet the brave volunteers risking their lives to save others.
1 minute you're just an ordinary person, the next minute you're a lifeboat crew member.
That's what we all turn up for, to save people's lives.
Saving lives at sea, part of the Do Something Great season, starts tonight at 9 on BBC One.
We might find things here we don't like. They might be distasteful, they might be deeply troubling. But we have to know that, otherwise we have faulty history.
Historian Peter Barton challenges the myths of the battle that still haunts us. The Somme 1916, from both sides of the wire. Starts Monday at 9 on BBC Two.
I will try to go to Europe. My younger brother, who is